Chapter 321-5. Otherwise, with his temper, it is absolutely impossible to say such a cruel thing and stop speaking. It can be seen that the scene of Liang killing people really caused a deep shadow in the hearts of the two Tianlong people. Definitely, kill him. Saint Samara looked at the position of the 5 old stars, and said with an angry face. That's right. Saint Roswald also regained a lot of courage, and he could not hide the killing intent of Liang, and said coldly, he is not dead, where is the face of our Tianlong people? A mere pariah, dare to make us do so many shameful things. Now, it is time for him to pay back. He must be killed and his body hung in Marijoa for 3 days and 3 nights. As an example, quote, Samara Saint has already thought about how to torture Liang's body. But before that, the 5 Laoxing had to kill Liang. Although he was very confident in the 5 old men, Liang's actions still left an unforgettable impression on them. So, 5 old stars, are you going to kill me? Liang looked at the 5 old stars with a smile and said calmly. You are too presumptuous. The knife-wielding man in a kimono frowned, stared at Liang, and shouted. I thought that everyone's well water would not commit river water, but now I see that you have crossed the line. You dare to do something to the Tianlong people, and you want to kill the Tianlong people. This crime is too deep. The tone of the blonde, red-skinned man was full of murderous intent and was extremely cold. The rest of the people opened their mouths and pointed at Liang. If it wasn't for us coming quickly, I'm afraid, you have already killed them all. Naturally, this sin cannot be easily erased. Tianlong people, no one is allowed to insult. You have insulted the Tianlong people, and you must think of the consequences today. Liang, I thought you were a sensible person, but it seems that I was wrong. You are daring, and you have completely challenged our bottom line. In the past, we tolerated you a lot. Today, you should just be obedient. Quote. 5 old stars exuded a terrifying aura that enveloped Liang. But Liang's face remained unchanged, still wearing a faint smile. He laughed dumbly, and said, it seems that you are determined to eat me. Who do you think you are? After he finished speaking, an even more terrifying aura emerged from his body. Overlord is domineering. The ultimate domineering color strikes the position of the 5 old stars in front. The momentum of the 2 produced expansion. Zzz. The terrifying collision of air currents seemed to have a flickering light, as if the air was about to be split apart by the shock. The tyrannical airflow swept the audience, and the corpses on the ground were directly impacted and flew to the surrounding positions, messy, and some fell directly into the sea. On the edge of the battlefield, Saint Roswald and Saint Samora were directly thrown a dozen meters away by this air current, and they rolled on the ground, very embarrassed. Saint Roswald's injury became more serious, and he cried out in pain, but no one at the scene looked at his position. Even if it is a 5 old star, when facing Liang, he has to be 12 points of energy and be cautious. Your strength, it seems, is not very good. Can the overlord of 5 people only explode to such an extent? If that's the case, then you will all die today. Liang's face was calm, and the domineering look on his body spread rapidly. Directly, it blocked the overlord color of the 5 old stars in front of him, motionless, and was not affected in the slightest. Chapter 322-Overlord Color Collision. Buzz. The terrifying tyrannical domineering swept the audience, and the 5 people in front, including the 5 old stars, also burst into a majestic tyrannical arrogance, which clashed with Liang's tyrannical arrogance. The overlord color of the fusion of 5 people is on par with the overlord color of Liang alone. The airflow surged, and the strong airflow rolled everything around. The corpse was blown away, and an empty place appeared on the ground. With Liang and the 5 old stars as the center points, the position of the lieutenant general flickered with bursts of brilliance, and that terrifying aura made the scalp numb. Not far away, Saint Roswald and Saint Samora, who were swept away by this air current, looked terrified and looked at the changes in the scene ahead without saying a word, feeling uneasy. Li Ang was actually able to compete with the 5 old stars. This is simply so unbelievable. Impossible. Rhodes, 023. Wade Saint temporarily forgot the pain all over his body, staring blankly at the picture in front of him. The whole person was like a lightning strike, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. The strength of the 5 old stars clearly stands at the top of Mary Joa. But even with such combat power, is it still unable to compete with Li Ang? Thinking of this, the 2 Tianlong people looked at each other, and they could see the tension in each other's hearts. The fear that had dissipated once again spread in the heart. No, we'll just look at it. Saint Samara took a deep breath, shook his head quickly, and said firmly. All their confidence can only be pinned on the 5 old stars in front of them. If the 5 old stars are defeated, then they are not far from death. If the 5 old stars win, naturally, they will all have a chance to survive. This battle is a matter of their lives and safety. Moreover, if the 5 old stars are really defeated, it will be the beginning of real turmoil for Mary Joa. As the guardian of the Tianlong people, it is precisely because of the existence of the 5 old stars that the Tianlong people dare to be so arrogant. If the 5 old stars are defeated, the consequences will be disastrous. Front. The center of the battlefield. Li Ang's face was calm, looking at Wu Laoxing and other 5 people in front of him. He smiled lightly. Your strength doesn't seem to be very good. You still want to kill me like this? I think you are daydreaming. Wait and see. The man in the kimono holding the blade snorted coldly. His face was not good, he said. Wait and see. You really dare to say it, then I have to tell you good news. Now you are already the ultimate overlord, right? But, unfortunately, I haven't contributed. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Well. Wu Laoxing's expression changed involuntarily. He looked at Li Ang very cautiously and meticulously. He didn't dare to move his eyes at all to observe each other's every move to prevent a sudden attack. It can be seen that the enemy is Li Ang, which also prevents them from acting rashly. This is to fight against the terrifying existence of the Navy headquarters alone. Even the 5 old stars felt a lot of pressure in their hearts. They are indeed very strong, and they are even better than the generals. However, Li Ang's strength is stronger. I'm going to explode with all my strength. You must not lose. Otherwise, it will be too boring. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, and with a wisp of a smile, he said. At the same time. Buzz. The terrifying overlord color spreads from his body. This overlord color is domineering. It directly defeats the overlord color of the 5 old stars in front, and the body is completely intact. Chapter 322-Overlord Color Collision. The terrifying overlord color spreads from his body. This overlord color is domineering. It directly defeats the overlord color of the 5 old stars in front, and the body is completely intact. The speed of the defeat is simply breathtaking. Boom. The terrifying airflow swept the audience. Wu Laoxing and other 5 people were horrified, stared at Li Ang, involuntarily lifted a few steps back, felt the terrifying aura coming from his body, and his face became more and more ugly. They didn't expect that Li Ang's domineering arrogance would be so terrifying. Even the redhead known as the strongest overlord color is not so terrifying overlord color domineering. It can be said that after today, the title of the strongest overlord will change hands. Recalling the speed of Li Ang's rise, the 5 old stars felt extremely heavy in their hearts. The world's greatest swordsman moved from Hawkeye's head to Li Ang's head. And the most domineering tyrant is about to be transferred from the red-haired head to Li Ang's head. The so-called most powerful man in the world will be transferred from the head of Whitebeard to Li Ang. All kinds of feats, the title of Snatch, the original owner is an extremely ferocious existence. But in front of Li Ang, the title that originally belonged to him was continuously taken away. Whether it's swordsmanship or tyrannical arrogance. These two, on Li Ang's body, are both perfect and impeccable. Don't you let me down, it's gone. Li Ang shook his head, the terrifying overlord buzzing around his body swept the audience. Even the branches were cracked. Click. A trace was cracked on the ground, and it gradually spread like a spider web. The inch of land around Li Ang seemed to be dry and gradually cracked. See. Wu Laoxing was even more shocked and speechless, looking at the changes on the ground with disbelief. Click. With another crisp sound, the edge of the cliff cracked, and then fell into the sea, causing waves of seawater to splash up, and the sea breeze blowing, making them messy in the wind. This domineering arrogance, is it true or false? Even the ground was cracked. This is the strongest overlord. It's far beyond the red-haired overlord. It's terrifying. Li Ang is a monster. We've got a big problem and we have to be careful. We're not sure, we'll be the ones who will die in the next second. Quote. Wu Laoxing was in a heavy heart, with a depressed face, looking at Li Ang in front of him. Especially when they felt the domineering look on Li Ang's body, it made their expressions especially ugly, and their hearts were under great pressure. Under the suppression of this overlord, their original speed was also suppressed a lot. Although for people of their level, the suppression is not very obvious, but more or less 1.1, they will still be disturbed. And this level of battle, a little interference, can bring a lot of surprises, and it will also bring a great impact and change to the ending. They gritted their teeth and forcibly urged the overlord to compete with Li Ang. But as soon as they met, the domineering arrogance of the five of them gradually fell apart. It's not a horizontal match at all. Li Ang's overlord color is too strong, and no one's overlord color can compete with him. Looking at it this way, your overlord color still needs to be improved. Li Ang said slowly with a smile. In him, the domineering look of the overlord spreads around him in a continuous manner. The first tentative collision with the 5 old stars, he won. In terms of momentum, he ruthlessly pressed the 5 old stars on the head. Chapter 323 _ The First Generation of Ghosts. After being taught a lesson by Li Ang, Wu Laoxing's face became gloomy. However, it is undeniable that Li Ang is indeed a lot higher than them in the achievement of domineering and domineering. The gap between the two is too obvious, not on the same level at all. But seeing Li Ang using the attitude of an elder to judge their overlord appearance, they were still very uncomfortable and very aggrieved. Boy, the overlord color does not represent the strength level of an individual tilde. Skinned sturdy man looked at Li Ang coldly and said. Of Li Ang's terrifying overlord, he can still keep his face unchanged, which has shown that his strength is by no means an ordinary person. The other 4 were also expressionless, looking at Li Ang coldly, motionless. At this moment, Li Ang gradually restrained his domineering arrogance and said with a smile, So, what do you want to say? I won't be afraid if you fight 5 against 1. Besides, I may not lose. Huh. The old man with white long straight hair and a long beard snorted, his expression was unpleasant, his eyes flickered, and he stared at Li Ang, as if he would attack at any time. Bald-bearded man said, It's useless to talk too much, let's do it. Just to my liking. Li Ang smiled lightly and said. If you can do it, it will never be more than a comparison. Let me come. A voice appeared, which surprised Li Ang. I see. The man in kimono, holding a long saber, walked from the front step by step. He was stepping on wooden sandals under his feet. Even on the soil, there was still a crisp sound. 1-on-1. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled. Interesting. Unexpectedly, not 5-1, but 1-1. This made him unexpected. If it is 1-on-1, he can completely damage any of the 5 old stars in front of him. This is his confidence in his own strength. Don't take it easy. The bald beard raised his brows and reminded. I have a sense of proportion, I just want to try, whether the strength level of the world's largest swordsman is in line with the title. The man in the kimono said directly without any expression. As you wish, don't blame anyone for being killed. The bald beard snorted coldly and said lightly. look like this. The 5 old stars are not as harmonious as they seem on the surface. Or, each of them represents a different genre of Tianlong people. Many times, opinions cannot be aligned, and at that time a vote is required to decide. Don't worry, I won't be killed easily. The man in the kimono was quite confident in his own strength, raised his head, hung with a strong confidence, held a saber, and walked towards Li Yang's position without a hitch. Behind him, the other 4-5 old stars kept their faces unchanged and started talking in a low voice. If there is an accident, do it as soon as possible. I know that although the relationship with him is not very good on weekdays. However, in this case, there must be no loss of personnel and must be prevented. It depends how far they can play. Hopefully, it won't be too bad. Quote. The 4 were behind, watching the battle ahead. The 5 old stars of the 5 people know each other well, and their strengths are similar, and none of them are particularly strong to the point of surpassing others. Therefore, a man in a kimono can represent the average level of any one of them. If the kimono men were killed in seconds, then they would have nothing to do with them. Chapter 323 _ The first generation of ghosts. If the kimono men were killed in seconds, then they would have nothing to do with them. Of course. They won't think that Li Yang will lose. Even if it is an enemy, they have to admit that Li Yang's strength is at the top of this world. It is no exaggeration to say that he is the king of heads up. Even Kaido might not be as good as Li Yang. In terms of the strength of the heads up, Li Yang has never been afraid of anyone, whether it is Whitebeard or Kaido. Anyway, in front of him, in a one-on-one situation, he will never lose. This is also recognized by the 5 old stars. Li Yang is the king of heads up. Come on, let me see the swordsmanship level of the world's greatest swordsman. The man in the kimono looked at Li Yang with a serious face and said, Are you from Wano country? Li Yang's eyes twinkled and asked with a smile. Well. The man in the kimono raised his brows and said bluntly, What are you asking about? It's just pure curiosity. It doesn't matter if you don't tell me. But, I'm very disgusted by the way you dress. When I see your clothes, I always think of a country that I hate. So, if I accidentally kill you, don't blame me. Blame it, the way you dress is so disgusting. I can't help it anymore and want to kill you. A smile appeared on Li Yang's face and said slowly. When he saw the knife-wielding man in a kimono, he felt disgusted and wanted to kill him. You're weird. The man in the kimono was stunned by what Li Yang said. Why would you want to kill someone just looking at your clothes? Don't you think it's annoying to wear it? Not much to say, let me see your swordsmanship. The man in the kimono took the blade out of his arms and held it, revealing the full picture of the blade. This knife is divided into a cross shape, which is relatively simple and has a large arc. The blade pattern is a typical flame pattern steel burning blade. Its length is very long, much longer than the general blade, and it belongs to the blade series that requires both hands to hold the handle belt to perform. If nothing else, your knife is. Li Yang's eyelids jumped, and with a touch of interest, he looked at the man in kimono in front of him and said, You know a lot. The man in the kimono proudly raised his head, obviously very satisfied with his saber, and introduced, the demon sword, the first generation of ghosts. Sure enough. Li Yang nodded, not surprised. From the very beginning, he planned to have doubts about the saber of the man with the knife in the 5 old stars. As expected. This knife is the legendary demon knife, the first generation of ghosts. It belongs to one of the 12 workers of the Supreme Sword, and it is equally famous as the Black Blade Knight of Hakai Mahak. This is the only 2 that have appeared so far. The rest of the 10 Supreme Swords have disappeared, and they have not yet been shown in people's field of vision. Li Yang carefully observed the first generation ghost in the hands of the man in the kimono, and on the blade, he saw a trace of evil aura, which was permeating out. A demon sword that can affect people's minds. If used improperly, it will be devoured by the demon sword and become a puppet controlled by the demon sword, who only knows how to kill. It can be seen from the users of the second and third generations of ghosts. No matter how many generations of ghosts, they all carry that evil aura. As the first generation of Guido, the evil spirit of the first generation Guido is particularly obvious, and it is also the most easily affected mind. The bearer must have an indestructible will to display the power of the demon. Otherwise, it will only become a puppet of the demon sword. Chapter 324-Swordsmanship Showdown. And what about your knife? The man in the kimono looked calm, looked at Liang in front of him, and said lightly, "My knife." Liang let out a laugh, walked to the pile of corpses step by step, grabbed an ordinary blade, shook it a little, and smiled with satisfaction, "Just this one." Well. The kimono man's eyelids twitched, his expression gradually turned gloomy, and he stared at Liang, motionless. Facing him, he dared to be so relaxed, it really made him feel uncomfortable. After all, he is also a swordsman with superb swordsmanship. Although it may not be as good as Liang, it is not something that the other party can underestimate. Unexpectedly, when dealing with him, Liang didn't even use a real famous sword, just an ordinary blade that he picked up. "It's more than enough to deal with you." Liang's armed color gradually covered the blade, and the dark armor, 900, added a stronger defense to the knife. There is no armed color, and the simple weapons are facing each other. I am afraid that as soon as the two fight, his saber will be directly smashed by the first generation Guido. Blades of different materials are naturally incomparable. But with the armed color covering, at least the knife in the hand will not be broken. Crazy. The man in the kimono snorted coldly, holding a long first-generation ghost, with obvious blade lines, exuding an evil aura, like another deep purple smoke hovering over the blade. A terrifying murderous aura emanated from the blade and enveloped Liang's body. Kill, 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 kill. There were bursts of sharp voices in Liang's ears, which seemed to be influenced by the first generation of ghosts, causing him to have hallucinations. But soon, he came back to his senses, a meaningful smile appeared on his face, and looked at the man in kimono in front of him, his expression unchanged. He sighed in admiration and said, "As expected of a demon sword, it can actually affect the mind of the enemy." "You're not bad either." The man in the kimono said with a heavy heart and said slowly, his mind rolling. Liang got rid of the influence of the first generation of ghosts in an instant. This mind is simply too terrifying. If it was an ordinary person, he would have been influenced by his first generation Onishi, and if it was serious, he would have become mentally ill. No matter how bad it is, it will definitely be impossible to break free in a short time. However, it only took Liang less than a second to break free from that state. It can be seen that the strength of Liang in front of him is definitely far beyond his imagination. Immediately, the man in the kimono made up his mind, his face gradually became solemn, and he did not dare to be careless. The strength of Liang in front of him is not weaker than him, even stronger than him, he has to be cautious. "Come on, let me see what level your swordsmanship will reach." Liang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. After he finished speaking, he kicked his feet and took the initiative to attack. He held an ordinary blade in his hand, covered with a layer of black jade like hard-armed domineering, and exuded a terrifying and chilling aura. This breath is very strong, not the breath of the blade itself, this knife is just a very ordinary knife. But in Liang's hand, this knife is no longer an ordinary knife, but a spiritual knife, which can be exploded with extraordinary power by Liang. The level of swordsmanship is not much different from its own weapons. Especially in the case of armed domineering, the collision of the blades will naturally not cause cracks, and the continuation of the swordsmanship duel can continue. Kill. The man in the kimono was expressionless, holding the handle of the knife in both hands, and the long blade was aimed at Liang's position, always vigilant and full of energy. In the blink of an eye, Liang appeared in front of the man in the kimono, and the armed domineering blade slammed down. The man in the kimono didn't respond slowly, holding the first generation ghost to block. Boom. A crisp voice came out, and bursts of firelight flashed continuously with the friction of the two knives. Chapter 324-Swordsmanship Showdown. A crisp voice came out, and bursts of firelight flashed continuously with the friction of the two knives. Not bad good. Li Ang had a smile on his face, and the strength in his hands skyrocketed. Boom. A terrifying aura pervaded. The man in the kimono was forced back several steps in the blink of an eye, looking at Li Ang with a solemn expression. Come again. Li Ang twisted his arm, looking very relaxed and indifferent. His figure flashed, appeared beside the man in kimono, and chopped off with a knife. Boom. The man in the kimono changed his face slightly, holding the first-generation Gito in both hands, and attacked the position beside him. The sword energy was soaring to the sky, and the swordsmanship of the two confronted everyone in the surrounding area, shrouded in the oppression of this momentum. Boom. There was another loud noise, and the man in the kimono stepped back several steps. The clogs under his feet made two deep marks, the ground cracked, and there were perforations caused by slashing. The profound truth of the sword and the moon. The man in the kimono took a deep breath, mobilized the strength of his body, and slashed it down. Call out. At the tip of the blade, a dazzling record was forced out, radiant and dazzling. This slash attacked Li Ang's position swiftly and violently at a speed that the naked eye couldn't catch, covering Li Ang's entire body, bringing a violent attack that was particularly terrifying. Boom. A burst of explosion swept through the audience rapidly, and a tyrannical airflow erupted, with Li Ang as the center point, spreading around. The burst of airflow uprooted the weeds on the ground. Is it dead? The man in the kimono raised his brows, looked at the dust-covered position ahead, and whispered to himself. Be careful. Suddenly, the bald beard outside the battlefield shrank his pupils and cried out. Accompanying his voice just fell. Call out. A sharp slash shot out from the dust, and the dazzling light grew from small to large, magnifying infinitely in the sight of the man in the kimono. Not good. The man in the kimono changed slightly, his hands tightly holding the hilt of the knife, his eyes were covered by the dazzling light, and only the dazzling slash remained in his eyes. He clenched his teeth tightly, held the first-generation Gito, burst out with all his strength, and slashed the attack in front of him fiercely. Boom. The power of the two collides. For a moment, the man in the kimono was forced to retreat more than 10 meters, flying horizontally in the air at 4.4, vomiting blood, and was very embarrassed. At the corners of his mouth, bloodshots filled the air, looking terrifying. His eyes were wide and his face was full of disbelief. He slammed into a tree trunk behind him, splitting the tree trunk, and his feet were able to land. His breathing was rapid and his face flushed. From the dusty smoke ahead, Li Ang's figure walked out step by step. His face was calm and indifferent, and even the clothes on his body showed no signs of damage, completely unscathed. Is the difference that big? The kimono man's heart was tumbling, blood rushed to his throat, and he spat out a mouthful of blood again, his face full of horror. He thought that he would lose, but he did not expect that he would lose so completely. Li Ang in front of him, on the level of swordsmanship, coupled with the original terrifying speed, completely defeated him by crushing him. Chapter 325-I only used 20%. No. The man in the kimono took a deep breath, calmed down his mood swings, and stared at Li Ang in front of him, his heart tumbling, and he gritted his teeth. He could not accept the result. His swordsmanship has been honed for so many years. Even compared to Hawkeye Mahawk, he is confident and invincible. Even, he thinks his swordsmanship is stronger than Hawkeye. Even so, in front of Li Ang, does he still appear vulnerable? Thinking of this, he felt aggrieved, and his expression became more and more ugly. Tatata. Li Ang stepped forward and walked to the position of the man in the kimono in front of him. Finally, he stopped in his footsteps and stopped 5 meters in front of the man in the kimono. Immediately, he shook his head and said, "If this is your strength, then you can only play with me like this. This is really disappointing. your strength is not as strong as I imagined. Humph. The man in the kimono snorted coldly, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and shouted, "Come again." Is it still coming? No matter how many times you try, it's the same 17. Your strength is limited to this, and you will never be able to match my level. Li Ang said with an expressionless face and calmness. He slowly raised the domineering blade covered with armament in his hand and slid down quickly. Call out. A sharp slash, from a frontal position, slammed into the front of the kimono man. In his line of sight, he can only see that the dazzling slash is constantly magnifying. A breath of death hovered beside him, making him clearly feel the terrifying power contained in the slash ahead. With himself, it is definitely not on the same level. Break it for me. The man in the kimono roared, his face full of unwillingness, and shouted. He held the first-generation ghost in both hands, and a murderous aura permeated. The first generation of ghosts was completely activated, which brought a significant improvement to his strength. Boom! The first-generation goosh collided with a slash that broke out from Li Ang, with a mighty momentum. The stones on the ground fluttered and attacked indiscriminately around the location. Puff! The 4-5 old stars watched the changes on the battlefield, and turned the attacked stones into powder. Their faces became very dignified, and they watched Li Ang's every move. The same as the 5 old stars, everyone's strength is similar. Therefore, what they can conclude is that the kimono man lost to Li Ang in a one-on-one situation, so if it was any of them, it would only come to this result. Li Ang's strength is stronger than any of them. This is really troublesome. His strength is more terrifying than he imagined. The bald-bearded face was low and he said slowly. The rest of the people nodded, thinking about their next plans. For today's plan, only by attacking the entire team can we have the possibility of defeating the opponent. However, if we want to kill him, it seems impossible now for us alone. Being able to beat him is quite a feat. As for killing him, is it possible? Quote. Off the field. Saint Roswald and Saint Samara looked terrified, staring blankly at the battle that broke out in front of them, not daring to speak, and feeling nervous in their hearts. Chapter 325 I only used 20%. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. Saint Roswald and Saint Samara looked terrified, staring blankly at the battle that broke out in front of them, not daring to speak, and feeling nervous in their hearts. Especially after seeing the man in kimono being directly pushed back by Li Ang, the scene made their hearts tense, and the fear that had dissipated gradually resurfaced. He's too strong. Holy Samara's lips trembled, and his expression was full of fear. I didn't expect that he could reach such a terrifying level. Even the 5 old stars can't help him. Don't worry, there are 4 more. Saint Roswald gritted his teeth and said. Even though he didn't have much self-confidence in his heart, but there is no result yet, he will never accept that desperate ending. He still doesn't want to die here, it's too unwilling to die like this. He is a Tianlong person, and he has not yet enjoyed the glory and wealth of the world. How could he allow himself to die here? Now he still has a trace of regret in his heart. If he had known that Li Ang was such a tyrannical monster, he should not have provoked him. Now it's good, the 5 old stars have started, but as a result, it doesn't seem to bring them a sense of security. The center of the battlefield. Among the 5 old stars, the only knife-wielding man in a kimono had a cold expression and shouted, "Kill." He waved the first-generation ghost on his hand, and burst out a series of slashes, attacking Li Ang's position. At the same time, his whole person turned into a shadow, and along with the slash, he slammed towards Li Ang. Boom, boom, boom. Li Ang held an ordinary blade, which was very easy and extremely fast, and scattered all these slashes. His speed had reached the limit, and what terrified the man in the kimono was that in an instant, he saw the afterimage of the opponent from Li Ang's body. Too fast. It's getting to the point where afterimages appear. Immediately, the fear in his heart rose steadily, and his original confidence gradually showed signs of collapse. It was this hesitation that allowed Li Yang to capture the opponent's weakness in an instant. Your weakness is exposed in front of me. As a swordsman, it's not a good thing to have no confidence in yourself. Because of this, your sword moves will have more and more loopholes. Li Yang laughed, shook his head, and said. Immediately, he raised the knife and dropped it, feeling the man in the kimono in front of him approaching step by step. A terrifying sword chi appeared on the blade, and the sword chi lingered beside him. 467 is such a strong sword energy. The kimono man's pupils shrank, and his movements stopped again. At this time, Li Yang kicked his feet and took the initiative to attack, and the ordinary blades were full of armed colors. He appeared above the kimono man's head in vain, armed with a blade, and attacked. Not good. The man in the kimono turned pale in shock and hurried back. Can you withdraw? The corners of Li Yang's mouth twitched, and he smiled faintly. Cut off with a knife. Boom. The man in the kimono could only hold his head against his head, holding the hilt of the knife in both hands, and put the first generation of ghosts up horizontally, trying his best to block Li Yang's attack. With a crisp sound, his whole person was like a kite with a broken string, and he was knocked off more than 10 meters. While flying horizontally in the air, he vomited blood, his face gradually turned pale, and his body was embarrassed. With a thump sound, the man in the kimono hit the tree trunk behind his back. There were many scars all over his body, and the kimono was damaged. He held the first generation ghost and stuck it on the ground, his breath was messy, and his breathing became rhythmic. Opposite him, Li Yang slowly put away the ordinary blade in his hand, shook his head in disappointment, and said lightly, I only used 20% of my swordsmanship, and you are already so embarrassed. I thought I would meet an interesting opponent, but I was so disappointed. Quote. Chapter 326 hit the 5 old stars. Puff. Hearing Li Yang's words, the man in the kimono was so angry that he spit out blood from his mouth again, and a mouthful of pus and blood spurted on the ground, showing a dark red and strange color, making his face even paler. Cough cough. The man in the kimono coughed, clutched his chest, and gradually stood up. For him, these injuries are nothing. At least, he still has the power to fight. Do you want to fight again? Li Yang narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled faintly. If we fight again, I will use 50% of my strength to make you understand. Of course, in this case, you are very likely to be killed by me. Come on. The man in the kimono gritted his teeth and roared, his voice very hoarse. At the same time, outside the arena, the 4-5 old stars are also ready to start. They can naturally see that the kimono man has no chance to be tyrannical in Li Yang's hands. Only by joining forces can they fight against Li Yang. It is for this reason that the hearts of each of them are extremely heavy. Unexpectedly, Li Yang's strength was so terrifying. Don't do it. The man in the kimono was full of anger, stared at the 4 companions beside him, and roared, This is my own battle, don't interfere. Well. The 4 raised their brows, took a deep look at the man in the kimono, and took a half step back calmly. Is he crazy? The bald beard looked unpleasant and asked in a deep voice. One person and Li Yang duel, this is obviously a death sentence. He couldn't understand what the kimono man was thinking at the moment. Let him go crazy, one less of him, it doesn't matter. The blonde and red-skinned man said calmly and indifferently. His relationship is the worst with the kimono man, and the death of the other party is not something to be saddened by in his opinion. Although the 4-5 old stars are competing with Li Yang, there will be more pressure. But what the other party is thinking about, he will naturally not stop it. Wait and see. The other 2-5 old stars thought for a while and whispered. Front. Li Yang was a little surprised and said with a smile, You are really not afraid of death, but you still choose to fight against me alone. Don't blame me for not reminding you, you are really going to die Diaresis Tilda. Come on. The man in the kimono clasped the first generation of Onishi with both hands. His face was firm, and he shouted. As you wish. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. In an instant, his aura became more vigorous. Just now, he had always used only 20% of his swordsmanship level. But even so, he still directly suppressed the kimono man. It can be seen that his swordsmanship level has reached an unprecedented height. What a terrible picture would it be if it exploded with full force. However, in this world, there is really no one who can make Li Ang burst into swordsmanship with all his strength. 50% of the swordsmanship level means that he has a high regard for kimono men. Be careful. The corner of Li Ang's mouth twitched, and the speed was several times faster than before. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside the man in the kimono, holding a blade and attacking quickly. Boom! The man in the kimono is quick-witted, and uses the first-generation ghost to resist with difficulty. But the feeling of shock on the handle of the knife made his hands a little numb, and a huge force hit from the blade, forcing him directly back. It's not over yet. A voice whispered in his ear. Chapter-326 hit the 5 old stars. A voice whispered in his ear. I don't know when. Li Ang, who was in front of him, has disappeared. Damn it. The man in the kimono kept turning his eyes, trying to find Li Ang's figure. It's a pity that Li Ang's speed was too fast. He couldn't find any trace of Li Ang at all. Even if he tried his best to stimulate the knowledge and color, he still could not find any trace of Li Ang. Behind you. Li Ang held the blade and slid down. Puff. The blade slashed the back of the man in the kimono, revealing a terrifying scar. The blood was blurred, exposed, and the pain caused him to take a deep breath. Die. The man in the kimono responded very quickly, and the first-generation Kitaru slid past the position behind him. Boom. Li Ang's expression remained unchanged. As he had long expected, the blade resisted the position beside him, and there were bursts of friction with the first-generation Goosh, and the fire was shining. Break it for me. The man in the kimono had blue veins on his forehead, and even his glasses had already been broken. His tattered eyes, a torn kimono, and countless scars on his body made his figure look extremely ferocious. Too slow. Li Ang shook his head, and before the attack of the man in the kimono arrived directly, he cut him off with one knife. Puff. Blood splattered. The man in the kimono stared wide-eyed, looking at the deep crack on his chest, his face full of disbelief. His first-generation Goosh, who was about to reach the top of Li Ang's head, stopped abruptly, unable to make an inch. A sense of powerlessness swept through his entire body and mind. Are you going to die? Do not. I don't want to die. A deep unwillingness aroused from his heart. However, at the tip of his nose, he still smelled the breath of death, which was constantly approaching. Li Ang's swordsmanship is too strong, he can't resist it at all. This is a fact that he has confirmed in his heart. It's just that he is still not reconciled. How can he be allowed to lose today with the swordsmanship he has practiced for so many years? And how many years did Li Ang train for? Can swordplay really make up for everything with talent? The kimono man had doubts in his heart, and for the first time he had doubts about his swordsmanship. After so many years of training, it is not as good as Li Ang's swordsmanship, which is a great irony. Go back. Li Ang glanced at the stunned kimono man, and a terrifying aura erupted from his body, which directly shook the kimono man back. Puff. When flying horizontally in the air, the man in the kimono still vomited blood, and his entire face was covered with blood, making it impossible to see his face clearly. He is defeated. Completely defeated. He is not Li Ang's opponent at all, and even the enemy of the other party can't do it. The opponent's swordsmanship, Li Jiaojiao, is too strong. There should be no terrible swordsmanship in this world at all. Plop, sound. Finally. The man in the kimono fell to the ground and rubbed for several meters before it stopped. Not a single inch of skin remained intact on his entire body. Although he is not dead, he is already facing death, and he has been severely injured, and he can no longer launch an attack easily. I'm not reconciled. The man in the kimono raised his head and shouted loudly, looking crazy. He trained for many years, but was defeated once. This kind of feeling is not something ordinary people can experience. It was as if what he had worked so hard to do in this life was accomplished by others in the blink of an eye. That huge sense of contrast made him lose his desire for life. It's time for us to do it. It's fortunate that he didn't die. Who made him so arrogant that he dared to face Li Yang alone? I don't know what it is. The blonde and red-skinned sturdy man's eyes flashed a bit of coldness, and he said bluntly. Chapter 327-Enchanted. Wait. The bald-bearded pupil shrank and said hurriedly. What's wrong? The blonde, red-skinned man raised his brows, looking at the other party with some doubts. Heard. The bald-bearded man took a deep breath, looked at the position of the man in the kimono, shook his head and said, I always feel that something is wrong. You can feel his surroundings around. The other three looked at the position of the kimono man. They frowned, and for a while, they still couldn't feel why. But the bald beard still insisted on his inner guess. He always felt that things were becoming more and more complicated, and there was an evil aura that was spreading out. Hope, it's just my guess. The corners of the bald beard's mouth moved slightly, and he muttered to himself in a low voice. If it was as he guessed, things would be even more troublesome. The other side. Saint Roswald and Saint Samora were dumbfounded as they played with the changes in the scene, becoming particularly horrified. Their eyes couldn't hide their horror. One of the 5 old stars was killed in seconds. Saint Roswald's lips trembled and he lost his voice. Saint Samara timidly took a few steps back and said, Next, there are still 4-5 old stars left. Can they join forces to kill this pariah? 257 should, maybe. Roswald's holy words trembled, and it could be seen that his heart was once again frightened. If I knew it earlier, I shouldn't provoke the monster Li Yang. Who would have thought that the strength of this monster would not even be able to help the 5 old stars? Looking at it this way, if the 5 old stars are all defeated, then it will be the 2 of them's turn to suffer. This is the most terrifying situation they have ever faced. I never thought that someone would actually do something to them, and if they did it, it would make them despair. They no longer dared to put the 3 words Tianlongren on their lips in front of Li Yang. What they have suffered more today will make them unforgettable for the rest of their lives. I don't know why, but I always feel that a sinister aura is coming over me. Am I being too sensitive? This aura is so evil that it scares me. The spine of Holy Samara was wet with cold sweat and trembled. This evil aura made him feel uneasy. Smell of evil, I didn't feel it. Saint Roswald endured the injury on his body and shook his head. That might be my delusion. Saint Samara can only think so, and he is not very sure whether his feeling is wrong. The center of the battlefield ahead. Because of the battle between Li Yang and the man in the kimono, the ground was cracked with traces, the cracks were bottomless and dark, and it was impossible to see how far they had penetrated. At this time, Li Yang's eyes flashed, and he looked at the man in kimono who had been severely injured by him. A hint of surprise appeared on his face, and he said slowly, It seems that it has led to an extraordinary existence. An evil aura that he could capture very clearly. It was emitted from the body of the man in the kimono. Kill, 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 kill. The man in the kimono felt that his eyelids were very tired, and there was a voice in his head that was impacting his beliefs. Are you unwilling? Are you unhappy with your own strength? Chapter 327-Enchanted. Are you unwilling? Are you unhappy with your own strength? If that's the case, then hand over your body to me, and I will replace you and become number 1 in the world. Kill all your enemies, and leave none of them behind. Yes, go to sleep, continue to sleep, you will find out when you wake up. You have become the strongest man in the world. Give me your body, and I will fulfill all your wishes. Isn't that your greatest desire to kill the enemy in front of you? Quote. In his ear, there was a seductive voice that kept ringing. And in his hand, the aura emanating from the first generation Goosh became more and more evil. The strange dark purple aura covered his hands, lingering constantly, enveloping his whole being in it. The purple aura gradually turned into bright red, and a forceful murderous aura rose into the sky. I'm not reconciled. The kimono man had only this belief left in his heart. Immediately, his consciousness continued to decrease, and his eyelids became heavier and heavier. If possible, I am willing to give everything to defeat the enemy in front of me. Man in the kimono roared inwardly, shouting, I would like to give you everything to help me kill the enemy in front of me. I must not lose, I must kill him. If you need my body, then take it, even if you take it. Go. Your belief, I have received. Next, just leave it to me. Jia 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 Jia. A sharp voice sounded in the deepest part of his inner breath. The man in the kimono completely closed his eyes and seemed to be silent. However, in the eyes of outsiders, it can be quite clearly seen that a blood-colored mist has shrouded him, covering his entire body. Not good. Baldbeard's face changed greatly, and he lost his voice. He is enchanted. As I said before, the first generation of ghosts can change a person's mind at any time. Sure enough, after he was defeated, he was influenced by the devil in the first generation of ghosts, and let him completely control his body. The devil in the first generation of ghosts. The blonde and red-haired man's face became more and more ugly, said. It's troublesome. The other two solemnly looked at the man in kimono in front of them and said slowly. Only those who are dominated by the devil can truly display the power of the first generation of ghosts, and that power makes all four of them terrified. Originally, they had forbidden the men in kimono to use the first generation ghost, but the men in kimono never took it to heart, thinking that their strength was more than enough to deal with the so-called devil. And today, he was finally eroded by the devil. His current strength is not much better than the four of us combined. The Baldbeard pondered for a moment and whispered. The most terrifying thing is that he can't tell who is the enemy and who is the friend. So, let's step back for now and leave the trouble to the monster Liang. That's right. The blonde and red-skinned man said the same thing. They agreed that if they did not withdraw from the battlefield, they would also be listed as enemies and targets of attack by the men in kimono. The man in the kimono is completely enchanted. As long as it is life, in his eyes, it is the enemy. Feeling the blood-colored aura emanating from the kimono men, their festivity became heavier, and they involuntarily took a few steps back and gradually retreated from the battlefield. The man in kimono who was sitting on the ground opened his eyes in vain. His eyes flashed a strange bright red, with an evil spirit, and the corners of his mouth raised an arc. He laughed wildly. His voice was harsh, the laughter was very unique. It was very permeating, and it made the scalp numb. A long time. He stood up from the ground, holding the first-generation ghost in his hand, and his body exuded a strong murderous aura, like the Asura hell, as if the devil came out of hell, with a cold aura all over his body. He still laughed wildly, took a deep breath, the fresh air made him feel infinitely beautiful, and grinned, I'm finally out of trouble. Chapter 328-The Magic in the Demon Sword. Immediately, his eyes stayed on Liang's body for the first time, his scarlet eyes flickered with brilliance, and a terrifying bright red aura permeated his body, with a strong murderous aura. I feel a strong vitality in you. It's just you, give me all your vitality. The man in the kimono grinned, the murderous intent fluctuated. Now he is no longer the original, he. Now he can be the magic demon, hidden in the first generation of ghosts finally appeared. Because the will of the man in the kimono was directly broken by Liang, the will that originally suppressed the demon collapsed and disappeared. Therefore, there is an opportunity for the magic to directly seize the body of the man in the kimono. At this time, Liang felt the majestic murderous aura, his face was calm, and there was even a hint of a smile, and said, I didn't expect to see a demon who has lived for thousands of years. This is simply too interesting. The fun is yet to come. Give me your vitality. I can feel that your body is obviously stronger than mine. Next, I will take your body. The man in the kimono smiled evilly and said coldly. The so-called magic is still an intelligent body. This makes Liang a little surprised. Not only can he control the body of the kimono man, but he can even have a dialogue with him, which is too puzzling. Demons, are they also human beings? Otherwise, why is the devil able to communicate with him normally? This point, Liang was very puzzled. The majestic murderous aura was surging, sweeping the audience. The other 4-5 old stars had already withdrawn from the range of the battlefield, carrying 2 heavenly dragons, and fled far away within the range that the battlefield could cover. They were watching the changes on the man in the kimono, and the increasingly strong murderous aura seemed to be substantial, turning into a bright red aura that enveloped the audience. So strong. Now, even if the 4 of us join forces, we may not be able to suppress him. The bald bearded face was solemn and said in a low voice. No matter which side is killed, it is not good news for us. The best outcome is to lose both sides, and then we can take the opportunity to completely leave Liang behind. The blonde, red-skinned man said slowly with his eyes twinkling. Whether it is the victory of the kimono men, or the victory of Liang, it is not the best result for them. In particular, the men in kimono have become enchanted. If he wins, then he will completely carry out endless killing in Mary Joa. At that time, the consequences will be even more terrifying. Therefore, they would rather Liang win than see the kimono man win. But the best idea is to lose both, so that they can completely kill Liang, and then join forces to restore the kimono man to his original state. But this is just a good idea. The current battle has not yet started, and it already has a chilling air, which makes people feel terrified. Especially the 2 Tianlong people, their lips trembled and their expressions were full of fear. 2 strong people, him, what happened to him? Saint Roswald looked terrified and whispered to himself. Dude, let me take you to therapy. Saint Samara wanted to flee the battlefield immediately, and immediately suggested. No. Saint Roswald shook his head with a firm expression and said, I'm here to see the outcome of the battle. If we lose the battle today, we will have no escape. Ah. Saint Samara was stunned, then gave a wry smile, shook his head and sighed. Indeed, if we lose, then we, Mary Joa, will also meet their fierce attack. It seems that it doesn't matter if we can't escape. Quote. The 2 chose to stay here, like the 4-5 old stars, to watch the battle break out. At this moment. Chapter 328-the magic in the demon sword. At this moment. Liang held an ordinary blade, covered with a layer of armed domineering, expressionless, and looked at the man in kimono who was obsessed in front of him, without any timidity. I have to admit that the men in kimono have indeed improved dramatically. But, that's all. It is impossible to break through the limits of human beings, and the limits of human beings are controlled by Liang. In any field, Liang is the limit. Demon, in the mere demon sword, just right, he can also try it. How strong is this so-called demon? If it's not strong enough, it's a real disappointment. Give me your body. The man in the kimono held the first generation of ghosts and walked to Liang's position step by step. His whole body exuded a gloomy aura. Murderous aura enveloped the audience. The majestic murderous aura caused all the lives of the surrounding generation to be stubbornly suppressed, and, disturbed by that spirit, they couldn't concentrate on fighting. Kill, 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 kill. An aura of rage emerged in Liang's heart. Obviously, the first-generation Gito, who was controlled by the demon in the demon sword, broke out the mental attack that affected the mind even more intensely. Even Liang was affected to some extent. However, at the same time, a mechanized voice sounded in his head. Congratulations to the host, open the modifier, mental power plus 999,999. Open black lens bracket comprehension is as stable as Mount-High close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough novice close black lens bracket. 0. Open black lens bracket breakthrough entry close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough proficiency close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Well. Li Ang's eyes returned to clarity, and he looked at the man in kimono in front of him with a half-smiling smile. All the mental attacks around him could no longer affect him in the slightest. The system really arrived just in time. Although he won't be completely affected to the point where he can't fight, but after the systematic modification, his spirit can be highly concentrated and will not be affected at all. Put into my arms, your body, and leave it to me. I will make you the strongest man in the world and kill all your enemies. The kimono man's voice became sharp. This was the voice of the magic in the demon sword, not the original kimono man's voice. The voice of the devil, with a spiritual influence, can't help but be completely affected. It's a pity that the person it met was Li Ang. Facing the words of the man in kimono, Li Ang's expression remained unchanged, the corners of his mouth curled up, and he smiled lightly. What I need, I will fight for it myself. And, you said, you can make me the strongest in the world. Yes, I will make you the strongest person in the world. The kimono man's eyes flashed, with a bit of evil and gloomy expression. But, I'm already the strongest person in the world. So, your temptation doesn't have any attraction for me at all. If you want to influence me, say something worthy of my heart. Li Ang waved his hand, appearing indifferent, and smiled. Chapter 329 _ How can humans be so strong? Even the man in kimono who was enchanted by the demon, who was controlled by the demon, in the demon sword, showed a somewhat stiff look, and even his footsteps stopped abruptly. His scarlet eyes were stubbornly facing Li Ang, as if he wanted to see through the other party's mind. But Li Ang's body seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist, making it impossible for him to see through. You are very strange. The man in kimono stood 5 meters in front of Li Ang and said suspiciously. This is also the strangest enemy he has faced since the first time he possessed himself. In the past, whenever he appeared, it meant the beginning of the turmoil in the sea. However, the man in front of him was very strange, and even made him feel a little shaken about his own strength. Come on, let me see your swordsmanship. I hope you don't let me down. Otherwise, I will make you disappear from this world completely. 430, Li Ang said with a slight smile, narrowing his eyes slightly. Little devil, you are very nice. The kimono man's eyes flashed, the bright red color became more and more vivid, and he said sensibly. After he finished speaking, the terrifying murderous aura on his body became more intense. If you want to try to change my spirit, I advise you to take it easy. The strength of my spirit is so powerful that even I feel scared. Seeing the movements of the man in the kimono, Li Ang laughed and said. No matter how powerful the magic is, can it compete with the system? His mental power, but his body shape has been modified, has already stood at the top of this world. And the actions of the demon, in this demon sword seemed a bit funny in front of him. Huh. The man in the kimono snorted coldly, his face gradually became gloomy, and he restrained his murderous intent a little. Unexpectedly, that majestic murderous aura could not even affect the opponent for an instant. It was obvious that the other party's spiritual power had already stood at a terrifying height. Come on, let me see your strength. Li Ang held a saber, covered his arm domineering, and took the initiative to attack. There was no tension and pressure on his face, instead he was eager to try, and he didn't care whether the person in front of him was the 5 old stars, or the demon, in the demon sword. All in all, what he wants is a tyrannical enemy with swordsmanship. If the swordsmanship is not strong, then all the demons should die. Call out. A sharp slash was forced out from Li Ang's blade. The slash pierced the air, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the man in the kimono. So strong. The kimono man's pupils shrank, and he shouted loudly. He hurriedly held the first-generation Gito, and the perfect fit caused him to break out a sharp slash. Boom! A loud bang. From the smoke, a figure was forced back several meters. This person turned out to be a man in a kimono who was controlled by the demon in the demon sword. He looked at his hands with shock on his face. His hands were numb, and the confrontation just now, he was defeated. This was the first time in his history that he felt such a mentality. In the past, he was surrounded and suppressed, and finally he entered the demon sword again. Today, Li Ying is only one person, and he has been pushed back directly. How could he not be shocked? Is that what your strength is? Suddenly, a voice came out of his ear. Li Ying's figure appeared. His speed was too fast. The man in the kimono couldn't react at all. His eyes widened and he looked beside him in amazement. Bright rays of light hit him. Chapter 329 _ How can humans be so strong? And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. Bright rays of light hit him. Boom. Suddenly, the man in the kimono was directly shot 10 meters away and hit a tree. His body was bloody and festering. Ta-ta-ta. Li Ying walked steadily, step by step to the position of the man in the kimono, without any expression fluctuations. You. The man in the kimono stood up with difficulty, staring at Li Ying, his face full of disbelief. He was completely taken aback by Li Ying's strength. How can there be such a powerful human being in this world? Tell you one thing, don't be shocked. I just used 50% of my strength just now. If you can't even stop it, then your demon water is not ordinary. With a relaxed smile on his face, Li Ying said lightly. With a crack sound, the man in the kimono's complexion changed completely. The world is so crazy. How could such a terrible enemy appear? Come on, let me see your strength. Li Ying's figure flashed and disappeared from the eyes of the man in the kimono. In an instant, his figure appeared on the other end, right in front of the man in the kimono, holding an ordinary blade covered with armament, and stabbed fiercely. Boom! The man in the kimono had quick eyes and quick hands, and used the first generation of ghosts to block, and there was a crisp sound. The fire was shining, and it was shining brightly. And Li Ying unilaterally suppressed the man in the kimono, using that terrifying swordsmanship and terrifying speed to push the opponent back step by step. The kimono man's lips trembled, passively enduring attacks from all directions. His eyes kept turning, and cold sweat was left on his forehead. I only have 60% of my strength, so you can't stop me. Li Ying was expressionless, and with a slash, the arm of the man in the kimono was cut. Blood splattered. This body has endured too many knife marks. You. The man in the kimono retreated violently, his face full of terror, staring at Li Ying. Just like you, are you still called a devil? You might as well be called a pig. Li Ying shook his head and said, slightly disappointed. The man in the kimono almost spat out a mouthful of blood. It was the first time he had encountered an enemy like Li Ying. He was unmatched. How can humans be so strong? Impossible. How can humans be so powerful? It must be a hallucination. Yes, it must be a hallucination. The man in the kimono was completely broken in his heart, looked terrified, and whispered to himself. He was suppressed by Li Ying with pure swordsmanship, and there was no room for resistance. 5.7 in Yaodao for thousands of years, and every time he appeared, it brought blood and blood, but this time, it was indeed the most embarrassing one in his history. He was suppressed to such a degree by a human being. In the past, he would never have dared to imagine such a thing. But this human being at the moment is really too strong. It is simply indescribably powerful. The other side. The 4-5 old stars stared blankly at the changes in the battlefield, looking at the man in the kimono who was unilaterally slung by the hammer. Their lips trembled, and their expressions were full of horror. Didn't you say enchanted? After being enchanted, the fit with the first generation of Onito is even higher, and the level of swordsmanship has increased by 12 times. But now, what exactly am I seeing? The demon in the demon knife was actually hanged and beaten. Did I have a hallucination? Chapter 330 _ The demon who was beaten and doubted life. Even the demon in the demon sword was beaten by Liang. It is unbelievable that the four of us may not be able to achieve what he has done together. The Baldbeard's lips trembled, and his expression was indescribably shocked. He was completely taken aback by the battle situation in front of him. Who can imagine that a man in a kimono who has been enchanted is still hanging with a hammer? Basically, nothing to fight back. This is a one-sided beating. Magic in the demon sword so weak. There's not even a chance to fight back. But they knew in their hearts that it wasn't that this demon was weak, but that the enemy he had to face was too strong. Liang's strength was really terrifying, and even the demon in the demon sword was suppressed. Thinking of this, the four of them felt a little timid in their hearts, and it could be seen that it was only a matter of time before this demon was defeated. Then next, it was the four of them's turn to bear such a hanging hammer. What to do? The blonde, red-skinned man muttered to himself with a dry throat. I don't know. The rest of the three shook their heads one after another, feeling a chill in their hearts. Originally, they thought that they could still compete with Liang by joining forces. But now at 17, they are still too naive. Not to mention whether they can compete, they can support 10 minutes, which is quite scary. But obviously, this possibility is quite difficult. This demon is too weak. The corner of Saint Rosward's mouth trembled, and he lost his voice. It's not that the devil is weak, but the enemy is too strong. Sacred Samara was terrified and explained. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that the demon strength in that demon sword is very terrifying, and the aftermath of the simple aura that spreads over makes him shudder. It's just that the enemy that the devil has to face must be more powerful. Only then did it seem that the strength of this demon was not as terrifying as he had imagined. Ahead, in the center of the battlefield, Liang held an ordinary blade, armed with domineering, and forced the man in kimono in front of him to retreat. His speed was too fast. The kimono man couldn't catch him at all, and could only passively endure different attacks from all directions. Puff! Another bloody hole appeared. The man in the kimono looked very frightened, and his mentality had long since collapsed. As the demon in the demon sword, for thousands of years, what kind of wind and waves has he never seen? What kind of enemy has he never seen? However, he had never seen an enemy like Liang at all. With one's own strength, he was directly suppressed. This man is quite unique. That's the strength. I only used 60% of my strength. You've disappointed me too much. You should be called a devil. It's a pity that the word devil is used on you. Liang pushed the man in kimono back more than 10 meters with a knife, and said lightly with no expression on his face. He won too easily, which made him feel very uncomfortable. I originally thought that this so-called demon's strength should be in full swing with him. But looking at it now, it was he who looked down on each other too much. This devil, weak and poor. Demon, in the first generation of ghosts, then it is really an insult to the word demon. The devil in Liang's heart is not so weak. You. The kimono man's lips trembled, and his eyes looked at Liang with unconcealed horror. He almost wondered if he had made a mistake, and why he was beaten by a mere human being. This picture, he has experienced for the first time in thousands of years. Chapter 330 _ The demon who was beaten and suspected of life. NLT, 29 and GT. This picture, he has experienced for the first time in thousands of years. In the previous collision, not all of them were comparable to each other, and they were still besieged, and finally obliterated the body he possessed. Now, a mere human being has beaten him to such a degree. He couldn't help but wonder if all the people in the world had transformed to such a terrifying level. Why did he just appear? The enemy he encountered was so terrifying. The world is too scary. The man in the kimono thought to himself, holding the first-generation Kitaru in his hand. The bright red vine-like aura seemed to be substantial, wrapping his wrists, allowing him to grip the handle of the knife more firmly. But this is meaningless. His strength, compared with the Liang in front of him, is still too far behind. Boom! Liang appeared in vain in front of the man in the kimono and kicked out. Puff! The man in the kimono vomited blood and was kicked a dozen or so meters away, breaking several tree trunks before stopping and rubbing against the ground a few meters away. His entire body was already beyond recognition. It looked quite ferocious. In addition to blood, it is still blood. Weak rubbish. Liang stared blankly at the man in the kimono and said, "You are also called a demon. You are just a waste, garbage. You." The kimono man looked angry, but he didn't dare to act rashly. Liang's strength is too strong, which directly casts a psychological shadow on him. If he acted rashly, he would really be crushed by Liang and crushed again. Trash. Liang disappeared again, and a voice appeared in the ears of the man in the kimono. I see. Liang kicked out again, kicking the man in the kimono to the other side. In this way, over and over again, Liang even omits the use of the sword, and directly uses his feet to kick the man in the kimono flying, completely humiliating. These are the words of the devil, that Liang himself thinks. He is God. Wait a minute. Kimono 907 looked at Liang as he was about to continue the attack, and hurriedly stretched out his hand and hurriedly blocked the road. Well, what's your regret? I'm already boring. I'm going to destroy you completely. The so-called demon is so disappointing. Liang looked calm, looked at the first-generation Goosh, and said lightly, as long as you destroy this knife, you should disappear. What I said should be right. No, wait a minute, listen to me. The kimono man's pupils shrank, his face paled in shock, and he hurriedly said. Sure enough, if you destroy the first generation of ghosts, you will die in the true sense. Liang saw the expression of the man in the kimono fluctuate, a smile appeared on his face, and said. Killing a man in a kimono is not the real exposure to this magic. Only by destroying the first generation of ghosts, this magic is death in the true sense. Wait. The man in the kimono was in a hurry. He didn't want to disappear into this world, so he quickly said with a dry smile, it's not good for everyone to fight and kill. Let's make a truce, I admit defeat. Then what? Liang's face was calm, unmoved, and said lightly. I can give you everything you want. The man in the kimono had an idea and said quickly. In this regard, he is still very confident in his heart. He, who existed thousands of years ago, naturally learned a lot of unknown things and secrets. Chapter 331-A man called a monster. Everything I want. Liang took a deep look at the man in the kimono, shook his head, and said bluntly, I don't want anything. If I have it, I can fight for it myself, and I don't need anyone to give it. With the existence of the system, he basically does not exist what he wants. Even if he wanted it, the system gave him something, which was far more powerful than what the weak demon in front of him had given him. I can give you something else, wealth, strength. Wait. The man in the kimono was in a hurry and said again. You are talking too much nonsense. I already have these things, why do you need them? Liang said with an expressionless face. This. For a time, the kimono man was speechless. He found that his understanding of human beings became more and more shallow. The original set of words to persuade human beings, up to now, actually no longer applies to 317 inches. It was so chilling, he gritted his teeth and had to figure out a way to survive. Otherwise, he was really afraid that Liang would directly smash the first-generation Goosh to pieces. At that time, he will truly disappear from this world. He is not willing to disappear like this, and he does not want to disappear like this. The plan for now is to stabilize Li Ang in front of him. If you have nothing else, then I will send you to hell. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, his footsteps moved, and he walked to the front position. No, wait a minute. Man in kimono spoke again, with a flustered expression, and said, I think your saber is very ordinary. With your strength, if you use the first generation Onito, I am sure that with my cooperation, your strength will at least double. If you destroy me, it is equivalent to not having a weapon that can increase your strength. Therefore, you must not destroy me. I can be your helper and double your strength. Quote. He began to develop crazy talk. Helpless, his fear of Li Ang was too strong. The strength of Li Ang in front of him is also quite terrifying, making him not dare to act rashly. Therefore, he could only use himself as capital and sell it to Li Ang, praying for a chance to survive. Oh, your words touched me a little. Li Ang's eyes flashed and he said slowly. If the first generation of Oni Toru is a saber, it seems to be a good thing. Moreover, there is also the demon in the first generation of Guido who cooperates with him, and the power of swordsmanship that he can display will obviously be several times higher, which is not false. But it must be taken into account that the magic inside will turn against the water at any time. This, for ordinary people, is a great crisis. However, for Li Ang, even when he was the weakest, the demon in the demon sword could not take away his body. Under the modification of the system, his mental power has reached the extreme. Demon, in his eyes, even if this monster is 10 times stronger, he is not afraid. Not to mention, he believes that it is absolutely impossible for him to fall into a weak state, which is his absolute confidence in his own strength. In this world, no one can make him fall into a weak state. Yes, I will cooperate with you well, and it will improve your strength by several notches. If you destroy me, you will miss this opportunity in vain. The man in the kimono took a deep breath and continued. In order to survive, he has thrown away all his dignity. The other side. The 4-5 old stars stared blankly at the picture in front of them, their expressions full of astonishment. They were completely shocked beyond words. Chapter 331-A man called a monster. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 31 and GT. They were completely shocked beyond words. This is the devil. This devil is too spineless, and he is actually willing to become a weapon in the hands of others, and he does not dare to say anything else. This demon seems to be different from what I imagined. The corners of the bald beard's mouth moved slightly, and the tone was inexplicable. He said. You think so too? I think so too. Yeah, this demon, I always feel that it doesn't look like a demon. He was beaten to the point of losing his temper. It can only be said that the monster Li Ang is too powerful. Even the demon in the demon sword was suppressed by him and dared not say a word. It can be seen that his strength has exceeded our imagination. Quote. It's terrible. Saint Roswald stood beside the 5 old stars, his eyes filled with fear. Watching helplessly, the man in kimono who was enchanted was actually being slung by Li Ang with a hammer. Moreover, the voice of the demon, begging for mercy continued to be heard. Even the demons were beaten and begged for mercy, even if they were Tianlong people. What should they do? Saint Samara swallowed his saliva, stared blankly at the picture in front of him. His legs were weak, and with a thump, he slumped directly on the ground, completely losing his original self-confidence. The sense of fear that had already dissipated gradually appeared in his atrium, covering his entire body, trembling, his eyes protruding, and the meaning of fear that could not be concealed. Ahead, in the battlefield, Li Ang walked to the man in the kimono step by step, looked down at him condescendingly, and said slowly, Go back to your body, I won't kill you. Really, really? The man in the kimono flashed his eyes and said excitedly. My words are never false. Li Ang said with a calm face. Good. After the man in the kimono nodded solemnly, the wisp of demon that came from his body gradually left his body and returned to the original onitaru in his hand. The red blood mist that originally surrounded him gradually disappeared without a trace. The blood-colored vines on the arms like vines quickly submerged into the first-generation ghost, and disappeared completely. Boom! With a crisp voice, the first-generation Onito fell to the ground. The slightly closed eyes of the man in the kimono gradually opened, leaning against the tree trunk. His body was weak, and he looked very weak. As soon as he entered his eyes, he saw Liang in front of him. His face changed drastically, and he wanted to speak. But his injury was too serious. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't speak at all. Only a hoarse voice could be heard, and it was impossible to hear what he was saying. The first-generation ghost. Li 4.7 Ang leaned down and lifted the first-generation goosh, holding the hilt in his right hand. A fierce murderous intent erupted from the first generation of ghosts, and a demon's voice seemed to hover in his ears. Kill, 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 kill. Do you want to die? Liang said with an expressionless face. Immediately, the first-generation goosh trembled all over his body, as if he felt the murderous intent from Liang, which made him also fearful, and all the murderous intent was instantly restrained. This monster's will is too firm. I originally thought that it would be perfect to have the opportunity to possess his body. But now it seems that there is no such opportunity. However, being able to be used as a weapon in the hands of such a terrifying powerhouse always feels that life seems to be very good. In the first generation of ghosts, a devil's voice came out. After all, it was still convinced, and was completely convinced by Liang's terrifying strength. NLT 32 and GT. Chapter 332-Fight Again. A very nice knife. Liang shook the first-generation goosh slightly. Although the blade was very long, it seemed to fit very well in his hand. Demon, who resided in the first generation of ghosts, didn't dare to say a word at all, so he could only keep quiet and keep himself safe. After all, it can also feel that Liang is definitely not joking with it. If it releases the thing that affects the mind again, Liang will really destroy him. Although the Supreme Sword is difficult to destroy, it does not mean that Liang is incapable. If he wants to, he can destroy the first-generation Onishi at any time. Rumored. Among the devil fruit abilities, there is a man with a rust fruit. He is the best candidate for destroying knives. Whether it's the Supreme Sword, or any other blade, it can be disassembled from this person's hand. Cough cough. The kimono man coughed and spit out a mouthful of pus and blood. His face was pale, and his breath was extremely weak. At this time, Liang held the first-generation Gito in his hand, and after getting used to it a little, he stopped his eyes on the man in the kimono in front of him, and smiled lightly. The first-generation Gitoru, from now on, it will be my exclusive item. If you are dissatisfied, you can contact me. I have another fight. Cough cough. 17 The man in the kimono coughed dryly and shook his head in pain. It can be seen that he no longer wants to fight with Liang. During the period when he was controlled by the demon, in the demon sword, he was only stored in his body, and he could completely see the changes in the outside world. Therefore, the scene of him being hanged and beaten again by Liang was still hard to hide in his heart. Did not expect. Even the demon in the demon sword can't help Liang at all. This is something he can't imagine at all, but it's a fact. Demon in the demon sword can't help Liang, so he doesn't need to say more. Furthermore, from the very beginning, he had already been defeated, and it was only because he was too unwilling that this led to the appearance of the demon in the demon sword. Come out. Liang turned his eyes to another location. 4-5 old stars appeared in his sight. Next to Wu Laoxing, there were also 2 Tianlong people standing, their expressions restrained and their fears that could not be concealed. Come on, you can't hide. The bald beard gave a wry smile, shook his head and sighed. Gradually, the 4 of them also came from a distance. In the last position, the two Tianlong people didn't intend to come, but they felt Li Yang's seemingly substantive murderous aura, so they had to walk with their heads. In particular, Saint Roswald, whose body wounds have not healed, can only walk with difficulty under the support of Saint Samara. But this short journey still caused the heart-piercing stinging pain to continue to spread from his body. Only facing the threat of death, he still dared not come. Soon, the 5 old stars and the 2 Tianlong people all stood in front of Li Yang. Wu Laoxing's face was full of solemnity, looking at Li Yang, silently waiting for the other party's words. This battle has come to an end here. The 4 of them didn't do anything to Li Yang, but it already meant the end. If you want to ask the reason, you can only think that the 4 of them did not have the courage to fight against Li Yang. Even the magic was defeated. They didn't think that they had the ability to win in Li Yang's hands. You are very smart. With a hint of admiration, Li Yang looked at the 5 old stars and said, if you know you can't beat it, even if you avoid it and don't fight, this is a smart person. However, you are not without a chance. If you are desperate to attack, your teamwork will still put a lot of pressure on me. However, you dare not. That's right. Chapter 332-Fight Again. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 33 and GT. That's right. 5 old stars dare not. After seeing Li Yang's tyrannical strength, even though they knew that there was still hope to defeat each other by joining forces, they still dared not. They are afraid of death. He was also deeply impressed by Li Yang's strong attitude just now. Therefore, they dare not act rashly. You two, come here. Li Yang looked at the 2 Tianlong people and said lightly. Ah. Saint Samara stiffened, not daring to move. The same is true of Saint Roswald on the side, and the 2 seemed to be very hesitant. They were really afraid, and Li Yang killed them both in front of the 5 old stars. You can make conditions, but you can't kill Tianlong people. The bald beard took a deep breath and said solemnly. Do I need your consent for what I do? Li Yang glanced at the bald beard and said lightly, or, you guys, want to fight me? I'm looking forward to it. Buzz. From the first generation of ghosts, there was a majestic murderous aura that enveloped everyone present. I see. At Li Yang's wrist, the first-generation Goosh exuded bright red rattan, which tied his wrist firmly, and the gloomy aura filled the audience. The evil aura that belonged to the first-generation Goosh gradually spread, coupled with Li Yang's original terrifying aura, which made the 5 old stars feel the pressure, and their shoulders were heavily suppressed. Do you want to do it? The corners of Li Yang's mouth twitched, and his eyes flashed brightly. There was a bright red aura lingering all over his body, murderous aura. No, you misunderstood. The bald-bearded forehead dripped with cold sweat, and hurriedly said. He doesn't want to fight against this monster, Li Yang. At this time, this is simply asking for his own death. However, if the 4 of them join forces, they really have a chance to defeat Li Yang, but the chance is not very big, only 20%. And the chance of Li Yang killing them is as high as 80%. 943. Therefore, they did not dare to attack Li Yang because the probability of death was too high. It's really a pity. Li Yang's face was calm, and he restrained his breath a little. The red rattan that spread out from the first generation of ghosts has gradually become restrained. For a moment, the terrifying murderous aura disappeared without a trace. With a bit of disappointment, Li Yang shook his head and said, I thought you were really going to do it, but I didn't expect you to be cowardly. I still want to try it, the power of the first generation of Goosh. Ah! The 5 old stars were stunned, and their hearts were pounding. Feelings, Li Yang in front of him is looking for trouble, can't wait to fight with them, and then kill them. Fortunately, they stopped quickly, otherwise, they would really have to fight Li Yang. Li Yang, who now controls the first generation of Goosh, has almost doubled his strength. No matter how confident they are, they would not dare to choose to do it at this time. This monster really wants to kill us all. The Baldbeard thought to himself, and couldn't help but complain. The rest of the 5 old stars were in a similar mood. Li Ang, who had just obtained the first-generation Goosh, really wanted to urgently find an opponent and try the power of the first-generation Goosh to see how much it could increase his strength. It's a pity that the 5 old stars are too embarrassed to fight at all. NLT, 34 and GT. Chapter 333-Dragon's Nightmare. This made Li Ang very unhappy. He kept trying to provoke battles, but in the face of such a tolerant 5 old star, there was nothing he could do. We admit it. Wu Laoxing looked at Li Ang very sincerely and said slowly. It's not that they were cowardly, but that they couldn't compete with Li Ang at all. It's not a question of cowardice, it's a question of rationality. If they rashly attacked Li Ang, the result would be something they couldn't bear. There is a high chance that they will be directly killed by Li Ang in front of them. Such a result is very terrifying, and Marijoya will also have a huge turmoil. You too, aren't you arrogant? Li Ang put the first-generation ghost into the scabbard, held it with his left hand, and patted the head of Saint Roswald in front of him with his right hand, and said with a smile. Immediately, Saint Roswald's humiliated face flushed. In his life, he has been humiliated the most times today. And, especially the humiliation that is taking place right now, he is not capable of resisting. As a noble Tianlong person, it was the first time he felt this kind of feeling, and it was too uncomfortable. It turns out that Tianlong people do not mean everything. And now, they have encountered the monster Li Ang, and the 5 old stars who have persecuted them have all surrendered. As Tianlong people, they are inevitably afraid to speak. Their biggest reliance is the Navy headquarters and the 5 old stars. Now that even the 5 old stars have given up, what else can they do? The biggest hole card is gone, they can only be reduced to ordinary people. You, what do you want? We can give it to you. Holy Samara's lips trembled and said quickly. Kneel down. Li Ang was expressionless, and in front of the 5 old stars, let the Tianlong people kneel. Well. Wu Laoxing raised his brows and took a deep breath, but in the end, he still didn't say anything. They were very dissatisfied with Li Ang's actions, but due to the terrifying strength of the other party, they had to choose silence, otherwise, it would be their turn to bear Li Ang's attack next. They don't think that 5 people can fight against Li Ang together. Especially when one of the 5 old stars was severely injured, their combat power was reduced by 1/5. However, even if 5 people join forces, they may not be able to get Li Ang. Li Ang, who has now controlled the first generation of Goosh, has already surpassed their imagination. If you cannot provoke it, try not to provoke it. The things that this group of Tianlong people caused, let them end by themselves. As long as you don't get killed. Saint Roswald and Saint Samara looked at each other and couldn't help looking at the position of the 5 old stars. The 5 old stars they saw all turned their attention away. Obviously, they deliberately chose not to see the scene in front of them. The 2 of them were completely cold, and their hearts were covered with a huge humiliation. But helplessly, under the oppression of Li Ang, they had to choose humiliation. Plop, sound. The 2 knelt down, gritted their teeth, and looked aggrieved, but did not dare to say a word. I really knelt down, so, Tianlong people, that's all. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Puff. Roswald vomited blood and angered his heart, causing dark wounds to appear in his body. Li Ang's words directly pierced into his heart, causing his remaining dignity to collapse directly. Tianlong people, still kneel. Chapter 333-Dragon's Nightmare. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. NLT, 35 and GT. Tianlong people, still kneel. The nightmare of the 2 is today. The identity of the Tianlong people did not bring any effect to the 2 of them. Except for avoiding death, they had to follow Li Ang's words for everything else. Otherwise, if Li Ang wanted to kill them, the 5 old stars would not dare to act rashly. Apologize to me. Li Ang looked at the 2 kneeling Tianlong people and smiled lightly. The world aristocrat Tianlong, kneeling in front of him, this scene really made him feel unusually comfortable. Arrogant people always have wicked people to grind. Mr. Li Ang, we were wrong, we should never provoke you. We were wrong, we deserve to die for our sins, please forgive us. Saint Roswald and Saint Samara knelt on the ground and kept begging for mercy. Saying these words seems to have consumed a lot of courage in their hearts. Bowing their heads, their faces are full of shame, and they are flushed. Li Ang, who was regarded as a pariah in their eyes, finally made them kneel. If it happened in the past, they would never believe this picture. Speak louder, I don't think you have any sincerity. Li Ang laughed and shouted again. Mr. Li Ang, we were wrong. The 2 heavenly dragons gritted their teeth and shouted in unison. The voice was loud and reverberated around. The faces of the 5 old stars also became very unnatural. After all, the 5 of them are guardians, and they watched the Tianlong people kneel and apologize to an ordinary person. This scene really made them feel indescribable. However, Li Ang's strength is really too strong, and he also has the capital to make the Tianlong people kneel. If you don't kneel, you will die. This is what Li Ang thought in his heart. If he doesn't kneel, then kill these 2 Tianlong people. If the 5 old stars block it, then all the 5 old stars will be killed. Quote. Very good, I just said, you are very suitable for being a dog leg. Although it is the first time to kneel down to apologize to a mere pariah, your kneeling posture is more familiar than a dog leg. That's why I said, your bloodline is lowly. Li Ang laughed loudly, and in front of the 5 old stars, he directly said that the blood of the Tianlong people was very despicable. Moreover, the appearance that the 5 old stars did not dare to refute is really interesting. Saint Roswald and Saint Samara were angry in their hearts, but they didn't dare to say a word. Are you still patient? Your perseverance really exceeded my expectations. Li Ang looked at the 2 red-faced Tianlong people and couldn't help but smile. Forget it, I won't bother with you, De Nuo Zhao, about today's affairs. Call. The 2 heavenly dragons exhaled heavily, and their hearts were slightly relieved. However, when they recalled how they knelt down and begged for mercy just now, they were very ashamed and couldn't help themselves. They are dragons. However, he did what those pariahs would do. In order to survive, they chose to abandon the dignity of the Tianlong people. There are also 5 old stars beside him, who deliberately turned a blind eye, without any intention of blocking. The 2 of them were busy and bitter, and it was difficult to describe how complicated their mood was at the moment. Their Tianlong people are everything, in their hearts, they are self-defeating, inch by inch, and completely vanished. From now on, in front of Li Ang, they will all remember the nightmare that happened today. Even if they faced those so-called pariahs, they would not dare to be as arrogant and domineering as before. The shadow that Li Ang left them today is too profound. NLT, 36 and GT. Chapter 334-Father-in-law. Thank you, Mr. Li Ang. Saint Roswald gritted his teeth and had to thank him. You're welcome, I'm a very magnanimous person. Since you've already apologized, I naturally won't entangle with you relentlessly. Li Ang's face was calm, and he smiled lightly. Hearing this, Saint Roswald became more and more aggrieved, but he did not dare to say a word. In front of Li Ang, let alone him, even the 5 old stars must be treated with caution. Okay, today's matter, that's it. Li Ang waved his hand and said earnestly, of course, if you have someone you don't agree with, I'll wait for you to come to me. It's just that I won't be soft-hearted when we meet next time. I hope you can keep it in mind. Understood. Saint Samara was already frightened, and nodded quickly. Even if he was given 10,000 courage, he would not dare to retaliate against Li Ang. Even the 5 old stars were defeated, so he didn't need to say more. Even if you can find a group of loyal killers, can you really kill Liang? You know, this is a terrifying existence that even the 5 old stars can't compete with. Today, the 2 of them can be considered a complete confession. In any case, being able to save a life is already their great luck. As for those lost CP0s, it can only be ignored. Could it be that they still dare to ask Liang for pomp? They cherish their own lives very much. Even if they want to ask for 340 yuan, even if they think about it, they dare not say it verbally. This knife is mine, do you have any opinion? Liang looked at the man in kimono who was seriously injured and said lightly. No opinion, this knife, it must be used by you, is the most suitable. The man in the kimono shook his head, his lips pale, and said. The first generation of ghosts has left a strong psychological shadow in his heart. Unexpectedly, even he was controlled by the demon in the demon sword. This time, even if Liang didn't take away the knife, he wouldn't dare to use the first generation goosh easily. It would be better if Liang took it. This kind of terrifying powerhouse could at least firmly suppress the demon in the demon sword. If that's the case, then I'll take it. Liang raised the first generation goosh in his hand with a smile on his face. He didn't need a saber before because he hadn't met the heartbeat yet. After seeing the first generation of ghosts, he felt that this knife was very suitable for him. In particular, there is a devil hidden in the blade. Of course, the current devil has been tamed by Liang so obediently that he does not dare to act rashly. Swords with spirituality are rare. Even He Daoyi, who is also the same as the Supreme BHDG, has his own independent thoughts. But the first generation of ghosts has it. In some respects, the first generation of ghosts is completely above the Black Sword Knight, standing on a higher level. Just because its own will is too evil, it can affect people's minds. This made people reduce its evaluation to the lowest level. Even so, it was still ranked among the 12 workers of the Supreme Swordsman. It can be seen how terrifying its own power is. That's right. Liang carefully observed the first generation of ghosts, and his eyes were fixed on Roswald Saint's body, his eyes twinkling. He felt that it was time to tell the father-in-law adult about that. Now that he has completely confronted the Tianlong people, and he has won. He also has no other scruples, and can tell the other party calmly about the disappearance of the other party's daughter. Your daughter, Palais Zaluria, has disappeared in the Chambord Islands. The corners of Liang's mouth moved slightly, and he slowly stated. Chapter 334 Father-in-law. And LT, 37 and GT. The corners of Liang's mouth moved slightly, and he slowly stated. Well. Saint Roswald's pupils shrank, and he lost his voice. Do you know where she is? Even if she dies, I must find her body. No, she didn't die. On the contrary, she lived a very nourishing and happy life. Every day, she lived a carefree life. Compared with being a Tianlong person, she was obviously happier now. Liang shook his head and said truthfully. Recalling the happy smile of Shalulia Palace, he couldn't help showing a smile too. See. Saint Roswald's face changed slightly. No matter how stupid he was, he must have heard that Liang had an inseparable relationship with this matter. You. Saint Roswald's lips trembled and he hesitated. That's right. Liang nodded and said, I kidnapped her, you guessed it right. She is now in my home. I no longer take care of her, but she still doesn't want to go back to Mary Joa. It can be seen that she has taken a deep interest in the outside world. She is tired of everything about Mary Joa. I will take her place and tell you that. It's you. Saint Roswald's eyes widened and he blurted out. Are you surprised? Liang said with a faint smile. What did you do to her? Saint Roswald's mood fluctuated very violently, and blood spread from the wound on his body again, overflowing from the body, making his face paler and bloodless. Don't worry, I said, she's happy. If you don't believe me, I'll bring her here after a while, and let you ask her for yourself. Whether it's the happiness you're living in Marijoa, or the outside world. Li Ang patted Saint Roswald on the shoulder and said in a calm tone, "Father-in-law." At this moment, Saint Roswald couldn't hide the thought of the death of Saint Daegu. Think about the disappearance of her own daughter. Suddenly, he felt, things became clear. Li Ang in front of him, maybe. Thinking of this, he shivered for a while, his eyes flashed with a hint of panic, and he did not speak. If it was in the past, he didn't say a word, and directly let people kill Li Ang to avenge the Gusheng. But now, he doesn't care. Li Ang's strength was too strong, which caused him to rot his guesses in his stomach. Otherwise, I am afraid that Li Ang will kill him. It turned out to be him. Wu Laoxing also looked at Li Ang in surprise and took a deep breath. They had suspected Li Ang at the beginning, but later they ruled out this speculation. But I didn't expect that the real murderer was actually Li Ang. However, even if they knew the real murderer now, there was nothing they could do. The five of them joined forces, and none of them could compete with Li Ang. What would they use to save the Tianlong people? Moreover, Li Ang did not kill the Tianlong person, which means that the other party will not easily kill the Tianlong person, which is enough. It has been a long time since the disappearance case, and everyone has guessed that the Tianlong person is missing. The news also gradually introverted, no one cares. Naturally, they will not ask for trouble to push this matter to the forefront, which is also a very bad thing for them. It's been so long that they should forget, they will choose to forget, there is no need to hold on tight. In this case, it is not a good practice for them or for Li Ang. Chapter 335 Master of the Void Throne. Wait. Saint Roswald's pupils shrank, he stared at Li Ang blankly, walked out of his thoughts, his lips trembled, and asked, "You, what did you call me just now?" "I'm calling you, my father-in-law. By the way, I almost forgot to mention that your daughter is now my wife. Don't worry, I will take good care of her." Li Ang's eyes flashed, and he said with a smile. "What?" Saint Roswald realized that with hindsight, he was shocked and his eyes widened. Even if he touched the wound, the pain was forgotten by him. Of Li Ang really shocked him. "Father-in-law." Wu Laoxing's lips trembled, his expression full of astonishment. No matter how they thought about it, Li Ang actually became husband and wife with that Tianlong person. In this way, things are more complicated and complicated. Aside. Saint Samora was dumbfounded, staring at Li Ang in a daze, then to Saint Roswald, his mood was indescribable. "This, affection, is my brother's son-in-law. But this son-in-law is too cruel. He directly beat his father-in-law seriously, who would dare to have such a son-in-law? But when they think about it, if the other party doesn't show such strength, will they recognize it? The answer is of course impossible. If Li Ang did not have this terrifying strength, Roswald would have shot Li Ang now, and he would never agree to the marriage between the two. But now, Roswald's heart is complicated, his whole head is blank, and he doesn't know how to think about it. He was really shocked by this news and couldn't reflect it at all. Father-in-law. His daughter turned out to be the wife of a pariah in his eyes. Although this pariah now has a higher status than him, and his strength is also very tyrannical. But he still couldn't get better, and he always felt a little weird. In a few years, we will give birth to a big white fat man. I don't know for sure. When that time comes, please, my father-in-law, be sure to be there. I will give you a warm welcome." Li Ang looked at Saint Roswald with a smile and said, "Big white fat man, have a baby." Saint Roswald stiffened and couldn't help himself. Tianlong people, even have children with untouchables. Even though this pariah is very powerful, this kind of thing still makes him a little afraid to accept. "Father-in-law, why are you still kneeling? Get up quickly, I can't afford you such a big gift." Li Ang quickly spread his hands, lifted Saint Roswald up, and smiled. Immediately, Saint Roswald shivered all over his body, and the fear that could not be concealed in his eyes. Almost forgot. Li Ang in front of him is his son-in-law. This is a real ruthless man. Now, even if he has a lot of reluctance in his heart, he doesn't dare to say it outright. Unless he is dying, what about the father-in-law? Just now, this monster was about to kill him. He didn't think that his father-in-law could be presumptuous in front of this monster. Brother, congratulations. Holy Samara's eyes flashed, and he hurriedly laughed. Getting closer now is the best option. Since it is impossible to compete with Li Ang by force, then the relationship must be adjusted well. What happened today also left a deep impression in his heart. Cough cough. Saint Roswald coughed, almost spit out a mouthful of blood, and glanced at Saint Samara viciously. Congratulations. He didn't see it, there was something to be happy about. Chapter 335 _ Master of the Void Throne. NLT, 39 and GT. He didn't see it, there was something to be happy about. However, he had to admit that his cheap son-in-law seemed to have a lot of energy. Even in front of their heavenly dragons, they are not inferior at all. This man, get up too. Li Ang looked at Saint Samara beside him and smiled. Thank you very much. With an excited expression, Saint Samara quickly stood up and laughed. Bullying the soft and fearing the hard has always been a common human problem. They are Tianlong people, but when faced with a terrifying character like Li Ang, they can't help but be soft. Everyone is a family, so don't be so polite. Li Ang smiled, patted Saint Samara on the shoulder, and said. It seemed to be amiable, but it still caused Saint Samara to tremble all over, with a somewhat frightened expression involuntarily, and a flattering smile. A family. The corners of Saint Roswald's mouth moved slightly, and his whole body trembled. Looking at Li Ang's gentle appearance, it really contradicted the feeling of the great devil just now, and the two were completely different. They knew very well in their hearts that if they angered Li Ang in front of them, the appearance of the great demon king just now would appear in front of them in a blink of an eye. What is unacceptable is that this monster is actually his son-in-law. This is too unacceptable. However, as long as Shaolulia Palace is fine, I can rest assured. Just don't know how she's doing. Thinking of this, Saint Roswald gritted his teeth, looked at Li Ang, and said, Can you let me see her? Of course, when things are over here. It doesn't matter if I take you to see her, or I take her to see you. Li Ang nodded, smiled, and said. Wu Laoxing looked at the picture of Li Ang and the two Tianlong people talking happily, and there was always an impulse in his heart. The five of them are outsiders. Mary Joa. The deepest area, called here, is between the flowers. This is the forbidden area of Mary Joa. No dragon person can enter here. Violators, even the dragon people, will be punished and killed. In front of this empty area, above the stairs, stands a throne. It is located in the highest area, where you can overlook the position under the stairs ahead. And on this throne, there is a man sitting with his eyes slightly closed. Here, he was the only one left, sitting in this place without moving for a long time. In vain. The man slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were emotionless and indifferent, staring at a certain area in the distance. His face was expressionless, and his expression was extremely strange. There is an outsider, it's not easy. The corners of the man's mouth moved slightly, and he muttered to himself in a low voice. His voice was very peculiar, drifting around and wandering constantly. He stood up from the chair, and he didn't seem to have any aura fluctuations on his body, but he had a natural sense of nobility that made people face him, and at the same time, they couldn't help but surrender to his feet. I see. His eyes stared at a certain area in front of him. He didn't speak for a long time. His eyes were without waves, like a pool of stagnant water, without emotion, only indifference. His name is, I Am. In addition to this name, he has other titles. Master of the Void Throne. The leader of the Dragon People. The King of the Dragon People. Standing above the 5 old stars and standing at the top of the world government, his status can be said to be the most honorable among the Tianlong people. Even the 5 old stars must kneel and salute in front of him. Chapter 336 _ Warring States. Mary Joa. In a magnificent palace. In the empty hall, at the edge of a round table that was more than 10 meters long, 5 people from Chihuahai sat in chairs with expressionless faces, looking at the Warring States period ahead. This guy Blackbeard is really absent. Sengoku's eyes flickered, and his heart was heavy. Blackbeard's trail is very mysterious, making him unpredictable. Right now is an eventful time, and this guy also missed the Chihuahai meeting. It can be seen that the other party has a lot of plans, and he must have planned to be absent from this meeting. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the 5 Chihuahai in front of him, and said slowly, "This is the end of the meeting. I hope you can keep in mind the above." Front. Moonlight Mariah was grabbing the food on the table with both hands, gobbling it down, seemingly ignoring the words of the Warring States period. Doflamingo leaned back on the chair indifferently, looking particularly cold. 927, Bartholomew sat quietly, motionless, like a robot. Beside him, Hawkeye rested his feet on the table, without any scruples about the words of the Warring States period. The last female emperor, Hancock, is usually a lot, sitting quietly, but her beautiful eyes are absent, she doesn't know what she is thinking, and her pretty face occasionally turns red. It can be seen that she is 1000% thinking about Liang. Seeing how serious this group of Chihuahai looked, Warring States felt helpless, but there was nothing he could do. The meeting is dismissed. Warring States stood up, waved his hand, and said, "Finally the meeting is over." Hancock stood up quickly, stretched out her figure, revealing her perfect figure. The concave and convex, dark purple slit-style robes added a bit of elegance to her. She hurriedly walked to the door and left quickly with black high heels under her feet. She couldn't wait to reconcile with Liang. This short meeting, without Liang's company, made her feel like a year. Now that the meeting is over, she naturally wants to find Liang as soon as possible, hold each other well, and feel the warm embrace. ... Coast Edge. The 5 old stars and the 2 Tianlong people stood here, looking at Liang in awe. "Okay everyone, I can feel that my wife is coming back. Go back where you came from, don't waste time here." Liang narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled lightly. Yes. The 2 heavenly dragons nodded quickly and said. However, Saint Roswald's body was obviously seriously injured, and he was unable to act alone. "If you have a chance, let me meet my daughter." Saint Roswald looked at Liang, his voice hoarse. "Nature." Liang nodded and smiled. "Okay, let's go." Saint Samara was still unable to break free from fear, and quickly pulled Saint Roswald and said. He didn't want to continue to stay in this ghost place. He was dominated by Liang's sense of fear. Even now he saw Liang smiling, and he was still terrified. This monster, he is very aware of the terrifying power of the other party. Just as they were about to leave, in a not far area, the Warring States period and many Chihuahai came step by step, and it happened that they met with Liang and others. At first glance, the Warring States saw the injured 5 old stars and the seriously injured Saint Roswald. Immediately, his pupils shrank, and then he turned his attention to see Liang's figure. It seems that somewhere, he directly saw the development of the matter. Not good. Warring States' complexion changed dramatically, and he shouted in a low voice. This is Mary Joa, and he will never tolerate Liang being presumptuous here. Chapter 336 _ Warring States. This is Mary Joa, and he will never tolerate Liang being presumptuous here. Although the opponent's strength is terrifying, he is not at all timid. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly turned into a golden Buddha statue, activated by the power of the devil fruit. Liang, you are too presumptuous. The Warring States rushed forward and shouted at Liang. The voice was so loud that it shook the air. At this moment, Just as Li Ang was about to welcome Hancock's return, he felt the strong hostility of the Warring States period, and stopped abruptly, looking at the Warring States period with some interest. This guy really dared to do something to him. Just finished solving Tianlongren and Wu Laoxing, but unexpectedly, it attracted the old guy of Warring States. This is so much fun. Thinking of this, Li Ang looked at the position of the 5 old stars. He wanted to see how the other party would end. Buzz! A terrifying shock burst through the air, sweeping the area around Li Ang. Don't be impulsive. Laoxing turned pale in shock. After seeing the Warring States period, he immediately started to act, and his heart groaned, and his face suddenly turned pale. They finally ended up peacefully with Li Ang. At this moment, if the Warring States started, it would really fall short. Stop it! Saint Roswald and Saint Samara were pale and shocked, and shouted. They don't want to provoke Li Ang anymore, this monster is definitely their nightmare. Right now, if the peace is broken, the consequences will be even more serious. And the two of them are also likely to be redefined by Li Ang as enemies. In this way, whether they can leave here is also a question. This situation is definitely not what they want to see. It was difficult to reach a common opinion with Li Ang, and it would be too embarrassing if there were extra issues. Ghost. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, his right hand slowly pulled out the first-generation Goosh, and said lightly. He is communicating with the devil in the ghost. Soon. In his hand, strips of bright red rattan completely wrapped the position of the wrist, and the entire arm seemed to be connected with the first generation of ghosts. This is the true power of the ghost. The kimono men in the 5 old stars before did not emit the full power of the first generation Gito at all, but only used this weapon. The true form of the first generation Gito is the form of Li Ang at the moment. Can see bright red rattan in the eyes, bind the sword holder, and merge with the sword holder. At the same time, a terrifying aura erupted from Li Ang's body, and the bright red murderous aura spread, covering the audience and pressing heavily on the shoulders of everyone present. Murderous, like the breath of Shira hell. What a strong murderous aura. Chi Wuhai arrived late, and the 2.8 color of his eagle-eyed face changed slightly. He felt the breath emanating from Li Ang's body, and his face became heavier. Compared with the previous Li Ang, there is no doubt that the current Li Ang is obviously stronger. This monster. Immediately, Hawkeye saw the first-generation Goosh in Li Ang's hands, his eyes flashed, and his mood was very violent. This sword, this is a demon sword, the first generation of ghosts. Hawkeye's lips moved slightly, and he lost his voice. He is also the holder of the 12 works of the Supreme Sword, so he naturally knows a lot of secrets. According to rumors, the first generation of ghosts has gone beyond the scope of the Supreme Sword. Because this knife is too evil to be considered controllable, the ranking will naturally fall behind a lot. Even so, it is still ranked in the ranks of the Supreme Knife. One can imagine how terrifying the true power of this knife is. NLT, 42 and GT. Chapter 337-Heavy Hit. According to rumors, isn't the demon sword in the hands of the 5 old stars? Hawkeye's eyes narrowed slightly, and he always felt that things were very strange. Moreover, Wu Laoxing was seriously injured, like a bloody man. Coupled with the fact that the current holder of the first generation Goosh has become Li Ang, it can be inferred that this matter is definitely not related to Li Ang. Heavy damage to the 5 old stars took away the first generation of ghosts. Only this guess is the most likely. It is for this reason that the Warring States period will be so nervous, so he will do it directly. The real form of the first generation of ghosts, there is a rumor that there is a devil in it. Without the approval of the devil, it is impossible to show the true form of ghosts. Unless, the body was invaded by the devil. But with Li Ang's mental state, it is obviously not. That means, Li Ang, he has been approved by the devil. Hawkeye was secretly surprised and had a deeper understanding of Li Ang's strength. It is not an easy thing to get the approval of the demon in the demon sword. Of course. What he didn't know was that Liang did not get the approval of the devil, but directly suppressed the devil with absolute strength. 17. Under this terrifying strength, the so-called demon, like a grandson of a turtle, had to obey any orders from Liang. Buzz. The terrifying murderous aura rose into the sky, coupled with the thick sword energy, and Liang's overlord appearance. All kinds of auras combined and merged into a brand new aura, which made everyone feel the pressure in their hearts. Except for the Tianlong people, every other person present is a tyrannical monster. Whether it is Chihuahai or the Five Old Stars, the same is true of the Warring States period. Their strengths are all at the top level of this world. But in Liang's aura, it still seemed that the pressure was arduous. My lord, I'm stronger again. Moonlight Mariah couldn't hide his excitement, thinking to himself. Aside. Doflamingo's eyes flickered, and there was an excited smile. The stronger Liang's strength, the better for him. Working with such terrifying monsters is a real peace of mind. Now he is very fortunate that to be able to cooperate with Liang is the result of his 8 lifetimes of good luck. With such a tyrannical collaborator, the group of people in the New World had to tremble. When this monster comes to the New World, it will be their nightmare. Not to mention those so-called pirates, even the 4 emperors would shudder at the arrival of Liang. You are so charming. Hancock's beautiful eyes flickered, looking at Liang in front of him, thinking happily. In an instant, she fell into her own reverie. I imagined the scene of marrying Liang in a wedding uniform. With a swish, Hancock's pretty face turned crimson. The entire delicate face was completely red, and even the small crystal-clear ears were like rubies, flashing with conspicuous colors. Her beautiful eyes were full of brilliance, looking at Liang without blinking, and her eyes gradually became very soft. Positioned directly in front. Liang held the first-generation Gush with an expressionless face, looking at the warring states that had turned into a giant Buddha. The bright red murderous aura permeated all around him, and attacked the warring states from the front. The warring states, which was enveloped by this breath, was obviously more stressed than others. What a strong murderous aura! The face of the warring states changed slightly, looking at Liang, lost his voice. At this moment, that blast had already been hit, and even he couldn't take it back. Liang's face was calm, holding Gush in his hand, and slowly slid down. Call out. Chapter 337_heavy damage. NLT, 43 and GT. Call out. A dazzling slash, forced out from the tip of the blade, swiftly attacked the warring states period. Boom. The impact and slash collided, and a terrifying airflow erupted, sweeping the audience. The ground cracked, and the airflow erupted, rolling up the dust and covering the middle. Everyone's hair fluttered, and they stood firmly under their feet, resisting the impact of this air current. But the 2 dragons were not so lucky. All of a sudden, they were swept up by this air current and flew a dozen meters away. Finally, they grabbed the trunk of the tree tightly, so that they could barely keep from being knocked off the cliff. So strong, this monster. Holy Samara was horrified, and his heart was terrified. Hold me, I can't hold it anymore. Saint Roswald gritted his teeth and shouted. The injury on his body was still aching, leaving him unable to support his hands and had to seek the help of Holy Samara. The other side. In the eyes of the warring states period, only a light spot was seen, which was infinitely enlarged in the eyes. Liang's slash was not broken by his impact, but still attacked fiercely, sprinting directly at the position of his chest. Hey, do you want to be so strong? Sengoku's face was not very good looking, and he couldn't help but burst into shock waves from his hands again. Boom. Another bang. Puff. Immediately afterwards, a crisp sound slid past, and a smear of bright red blood splattered on the ground. The whole body of the warring states flew more than 10 meters, spitting blood in the air, very embarrassed, and looked at the position of his chest with shock on his face. A ferocious and terrifying knife mark continued to spill blood, and the horror was outrageous. Cough cough. Warring States fell to the ground, his whole face was full of shock, and he couldn't believe it. How long has it been? How could Li Ang's strength become so strong? In just one face-to-face, he was defeated, and he was hit hard by direct 167. Is that the knife? Warring States' eyes narrowed, staring at the first-generation goosh in Li Ang's hand. He could feel that the knife was constantly exuding an evil aura. Kill, 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 kill. A voice rang in his ears, and his eyes gradually lost their focus. Lost in battle, this is definitely a fatal blow. After he came back to his senses, his forehead was covered with cold sweat, his spine was wet with cold sweat, and he looked at Li Ang and the knife in his hand with fear. Actually, it can affect people's minds. I almost got caught. Warring States coughed, thinking with lingering fears. Just now, he was almost affected by Goosh's mental shock. If it weren't for his willpower being a little bit stronger, he would have fallen into the endless killing until he collapsed. Looking back now, he was still a little scared, and he was extremely jealous of Li Ang. This monster has terrifying strength, and now, he has obtained a magic weapon. This time, his strength has obviously been improved, so he has to treat it with caution. This kind of terrifying enemy is a huge potential threat to the naval headquarters, and it can affect the changes in the entire world pattern at any time. It's just this potential threat, and there's nothing he can do about it. Not to mention him, even the 5 old stars, and even the world government, are powerless. NLT, 44 and GT. Chapter 338 Peaceful Ending. Mr. Li Ang's strength really lives up to his reputation. Doflamingo's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but speak slowly. But the stronger the opponent is, the happier he is. Seeing that the strength of the collaborator is so terrifying, he can do some bold actions with confidence. Anyway, even if he gets into trouble, Li Ang is his backer and can save him at any time. Therefore, he is not afraid of anything. Especially, that knife. Brother Doflaming looked at Li Ang's first-generation goosh in horror. He only vaguely heard the voice just now, and was almost affected. If you meet Li Ang head-on, you can see how many seconds he can last. In front of Li Ang, the Warring States period could not last for half a minute. If it was him, he could last for 10 seconds, which is already quite a terrifying record. I'm afraid I can't hold on for 10 seconds. Mr. Li Ang, misunderstanding and misunderstanding. Wu Laoxing quickly stood up and persuaded. They don't want to collide with Li Ang again. If this monster really explodes with all its strength, even they can kill it on the spot. By then, Mary Joa will be in chaos. Maybe. Only that existence can have a chance to compete with Li Ang. But that existence has been dormant for many years and has yet to wake up. It's all misunderstanding, it's all misunderstanding. The bald beard quickly smiled and said slowly. The humble appearance of Wu Laoxing really opened the eyes of the people present. As the top leader of the world government, the 5 old stars, in front of Li Ang, nodded and bowed like a grandson. This picture is really unbelievable. Really or not, is this the real 5 old stars? Hawkeye's lips were dry, and he couldn't help but question in a low voice. He couldn't believe it. The 5 old stars represented the highest authority in the world, at least, in his eyes. Even he did not dare to be presumptuous in front of the 5 old stars. But at the moment, the 5 old stars are nodding and bowing to Li Ang. The compliment looks like a little brother, and he doesn't even dare to speak more, for fear of angering Li Ang. The faces of Doflamingo, Moonlight Moria and others also became particularly exciting, but more of it was excitement and excitement. Seeing that the higher the status of Li Ang, the more comfortable their mood was naturally. The other side. Hancock's pure white jade hand covered her face, blushing. Looking at Li Ang's domineering appearance, she felt that her whole heart was about to be captured. Cough cough. Warring States had bright red blood on the corner of his mouth, his hands resting on the ground, he stood up with difficulty, the golden light on his body was restrained, and he returned to the appearance of an ordinary person. Warring States, what are you to blame? The 5 old stars glared at the Warring States and shouted loudly. They just stopped with Liang, and the Warring States period was good, and they almost destroyed their peace. This is to cause a lot of trouble for them. After seeing Liang's strength, the 5 old stars had to give in. Taking advantage of the situation that no one has died now, it is the best way to stop. Just about to stop, and Liang also showed signs of leaving. The Warring States suddenly appeared, and the attack broke out immediately. This is to drive them to a dead end. Once Liang gets angry, the 5 of them will suffer. Warring States was stunned and wanted to explain, but when the words came to his mouth, he didn't know how to say it. Especially when he saw Wu Laoxing's nodding and bowing, he became even more suspicious of what he saw. In his impression, the 5 old stars are all indifferent and aloof, but today, he finally saw the humble appearance of the 5 old stars. Knew it. Everyone has a humble time, just look in front of whom. Chapter 338 Peaceful Ending. NLT, 45 and GT. Everyone has a humble time, just look in front of whom. The 5 old stars are no exception. As the top leaders of the world government, they still have to show their weak posture in front of a terrifying monster like Liang. Get over here. Wu Laoxing drank angrily when he saw the stunned appearance of the Warring States period. The Warring States came hurriedly, still feeling a trance. Shouldn't it be a dream, right? He pinched his thigh, and the tingling sensation reassured him that it was the truth. That's right. In front of Liang, the 5 old stars made a gesture that did not belong to them. In other words, only the monster Liang can make Wu Laoxing have such an expression. Apologize to Mr. Liang. Wu Laoxing glared at the Warring States and said quickly. Hearing this, the Warring States period was embarrassed. Looking at Liang, he hesitated for a long time without speaking. To make him think that he was a marshal and apologize to an ordinary person, and he didn't think he did anything wrong. What he saw was the severely injured 5 old stars and Tianlong people. It stands to reason that he was right. But there was no way. Liang's strength was too strong, and the 5 old stars had to ask the Warring States to apologize. The other party must be satisfied, otherwise, Liang will not give up. Recalling Liang's terrifying gesture before, they shuddered. It's not that there is no chance of winning, but that there is an 80 to 90% chance that they will die. The odds of winning are too low. They dare not gamble like this. Once they die, the world government will be in chaos. I'm sorry, Mr. Liang, I was too impulsive. I didn't know how things were going, so I rashly attacked you. It was my dereliction of duty. Warring States blushed, gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and said sincerely. It doesn't matter, you have also suffered the punishment you deserved. Liang glanced at the scars on Warring States' chest with a smile and said. Suddenly, Sengoku's mood became even more aggrieved, looked at his chest, shook his head and sighed. He had forgotten how many years ago he suffered such a serious injury in the past. Unexpectedly, today, Liang was hit hard by a single face-to-face encounter. This really made him a little hard to accept. Are you old? Do not. It can only be said that Liang in front of him is too strong. It is not that anyone is weak, but the enemy is too strong. That's it, everyone is gone, Zhao Hao. Wu Laoxing looked at the Warring States period, waved his hand, and said. They looked at Liang again, looking a little in awe, and said, Mr. Liang, I will take this leave. I should go too. Liang put the first-generation gush into the scabbard and said. Under the control of his mind, all the bright red rattan around the wrist also introverted into the knife. Now, he controls the first generation of ghosts, and he can do whatever he wants. The demon in the demon sword dare not disobey his orders, so he will really kill him. It can be said that even the devil is afraid of the man. Hancock. Li Ang turned to look at the pretty and lovely Hancock in front of him and laughed. We should go. Yeah. Hancock came back to his senses. His delicate face was crimson. He was walking on a pair of long, straight and slender legs, and he stepped on black high-heeled shoes. The purple slit-style robe fully displayed her noble temperament, which was indescribably beautiful. Chapter 339-Depressed Marin Vando. Li Ang spread his hands and smiled, admiring Hancock's figure. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't see enough. A gust of fragrant wind rushed to his face, and Hancock directly ignored the surrounding environment and plunged into Li Ang's arms. A sweet smile appeared on his delicate face. The purple slit cheongsam she wore could not hide her proud figure. Li Ang felt like he was holding a ball of cotton in his arms, soft and intoxicating. The picture of the two embracing immediately brought 99,999 points of damage to the people around them. Cough cough. Warring States coughed dryly, clutching the wound on his chest, looking at the location of Chihuahai, and said, board and return. Immediately, Moonlight Moria, Doflamingo and others gradually left. The 5 old stars even sent the 2 heavenly dragons back to Mary Joa. Li Ang and Hancock stood at the end, followed the footsteps of the public and walked to the position where the warship was docked. The two hold hands, and the picture is full of warm feelings. Now, let's help you vent your anger well, isn't there a reward 17? Li Ang looked at Hancock's beautiful profile with a smile and said. He told Hancock all the events and developments just now. Especially after hearing the beating of the Tianlong people, Hancock's pretty face suddenly showed a deep smile, as if to vent all his previous anger. Although she is incapable of taking revenge on the Tianlong people. However, my husband still has this ability. Thinking of this, her pretty face turned slightly red, and her heart was as sweet as honey. Then, under Li Ang's words, Hancock blushed and quickly pecked at the corner of the other's mouth. Like a dragonfly in the water, he quickly lowered his head and looked at his feet. I'm an old man and a wife, and I'm still shy. Li Ang took Hancock's boneless little hand, wiped the sweetness at the corner of his mouth, and smiled lightly. Huh. Hancock turned her head arrogantly, but her blushing face showed that she was also very restless in her heart. They saw a warship in front of them. As early as on the deck, there were already people waiting for both of them. Without the return of Li Ang and Hancock, how dare this warship set sail? The two took advantage of the situation to log into the warship, and under the order of the Warring States period, the warship returned to Marin Vando. On the deck, Li Ang and Hancock looked at the azure sea, embracing each other, and the rest of the staff left. No way, who made a single? Can't dodge. This is from the idea of Hawkeye, Doflamingo, Moonlight Moria, etc., plus all the sailors on board, a total of 104 people. On the deck, only Li Ang and Hancock were left to embrace each other. Sunset. The shadows of the two are gradually elongated, and the picture is beautiful and heartwarming. If you shoot this picture, it will definitely be the best collection. The other side. Lieutenant General Ghost Spider can finally breathe a sigh of relief, with the Warring States Marshal standing beside him, and it will not make him feel as stressed as when he came. Anyway, hugging the sky fell down, and there was a taller supporting it. The position of the Marshal of the Warring States period, but I am much higher. Now, it is time for him to try it. The pressure when I came. Ghost Spider thought in a wicked way, looking at the profile of Warring States. He always felt that hidden under the calm expression of the other party, he must be under great pressure. A few hours passed in a flash. The warship successfully arrived at Marin Vando. And Warring States also quickly entered the treatment. He has persisted for several hours, carrying the huge scar on his chest. It is already quite painful. But fortunately, in these few hours, he took some emergency measures to effectively prevent the loss of blood, which made the condition not aggravate with the passage of time. Therefore, the rest of the arrangement has to be carried out by the Ghost Spider. Chapter 339-Depressed Marin Vando. And LT, 47 and GT. Therefore, the rest of the arrangement has to be carried out by the ghost spider. At this time, the ghost spider was crying in his heart, and he had to keep calm on the surface, looking at the Chihuahua in front of him, and the monster Liang. He coughed dryly and said in a low voice, "Everyone, please rest. The battle is coming soon. I hope everyone can rest well and prepare for the battle." It's just that these words are a bit lackluster. Under the words of the ghost spider, many Chihuahua left lazily. Each returned to a different place to recuperate. The places where they live are guarded by Akainu himself to prevent other variables from appearing. However, Akainu's heart was bitter that Liang actually moved in, which was really terrible. With his influence, the rest of the Chihuahua can be jealous. But his influence was completely unable to stop Liang's every move. It is impossible for the opponent's every move to take into account his existence. Anyway, the strength is here. Even as a general, he does not dare to act rashly. Marin Vandone. A group of navies came and went, whether it was the cafeteria or the training ground, with a chilling air. The heavy depression made it hard to breathe. Drink, drink, drink. At the training ground, many Navy soldiers were training hard, and their voices were loud and clear. Everyone's face was filled with a determined look. They all knew that war was coming. If they don't step up their time training, they will have a great chance of dying in the front line. Only strength is the capital for them to survive. Next, I will take the call. Those who failed the training just now will go to the playground for 10 laps. The first one, Jera, Siri, Korid. The huge naval headquarters, no matter where it is full of depression. Faced with the imminent war, the potential in their hearts was quickly stimulated, and they continued to train to prepare for War 133. You run so hard for me, don't go to the battlefield, you don't even have the strength to escape, this is a shame. Do you hear it clearly? A dark-skinned instructor shouted to the naval soldier in front of him. Listen clearly. A group of soldiers shouted. Loud, haven't you eaten yet? The instructor looked stern and reprimanded. Listen clearly. There was an urgent atmosphere in the entire Marin Vatican, and everyone could feel that this was the tranquility before the storm. The time until Ace was executed was not long. This also means that the Whitebeard pirates are about to arrive in Marin Vando. A fight between the two will inevitably result in heavy casualties. If you want to increase your chances of survival, you can only desperately improve your strength. Go ahead, come on, I will never lose to you. Today, we fought for 3 minutes. Brother, wait for the battlefield, but don't be easily killed by pirates. Don't worry, I won't die. Even if I die, I will kill more than a dozen pirates and pull them back together. I won't lose anything. Quote. The Navy soldiers are high-spirited, and although their hearts are depressed, they are still full of self-confidence. Under the orders of the Warring States period, many instructors have instilled the idea of winning in these navies. Naturally, in terms of momentum, they cannot lose to the pirates. NLT 48 and GT. Chapter 340 that one exists. The sun shines down. Marin Vando's playground exudes bursts of vitality. All the Navy soldiers put into training and the Navy who went out to perform missions were also dispatched back to the Navy headquarters to prepare for the terrifying war in the future. Whether it is a lieutenant general, a colonel or a lieutenant colonel, they are all dispatched back to the naval headquarters. All naval forces are concentrated in the naval headquarters. Everything is ready, just wait, that day comes. And there are still 4 days left until Ace is executed. Office of the Marshal. Warring States was sitting on a chair, a white gauze wrapped around his chest, and the wound had been sutured. With his strong physique, he would be healed within 3 days. It just so happened that there were still 4 days left before the battle, and there was still plenty of time for him to recover from his injuries. Dong dong dong. The door was knocked. Come in. Warring States put down the layout plan on his hand and said lightly. Crunch. After the door was opened, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider walked in and said respectfully, "Marshal. What's the matter?" Warring States rubbed his temples and said. He was really tired these days. Not only did he have to deal with a lot of things, but he also had to always be on guard against attacks from the Whitebeard pirates. Furthermore, the existence of that monster inside the Navy headquarters made him so annoyed that his eyebrows were burning. If he knew that the monster would stay here, he shouldn't have informed the Empress Hancock, no matter what he said. Well, the Empress did come, but she also followed a difficult monster. Fortunately, this monster will not act rashly, nor will it be biased to any side. Otherwise, there is no need to fight this battle. If this monster is biased towards the Whitebeard pirates, the Navy headquarters will be defeated. This is something that does not need to be thought about. That's right. Warring States took a deep breath, looked at the Ghost Spider, and asked, "How's the Whitebeard-like movement? Have our spies noticed anything unusual about them? I came here this time to report this matter." Ghost Spider's face was solemn and he said slowly, "As early as 5 days ago, the Whitebeard pirates disappeared in the waters of the New World. Now our spies can't find their location at all. Finally dispatched. Whitebeard." Warring States' eyelids twitched, and his face gradually became gloomy, said. As an old opponent, he naturally knew Whitebeard's terrifying strength. Fighting with each other is just a different position, but he will never back down. What about other sources of information? Sengoku calmed down and asked. The same thing, there is no news. It's as if the Whitebeard pirates disappeared into the waters of the New World out of thin air, without being discovered by anyone. Ghost Spider said solemnly. No source can reveal the address of the Whitebeard pirates. This put a lot of pressure on him. Immediately, he asked tentatively, "Marshal of the Warring States period, you said, will they suddenly attack the advanced city?" No. Warring States' face was calm, he shook his head and said, "With the character of Whitebeard I know, they will definitely rush to Marin Fando and collide with us head-on. Furthermore, they may not be able to break through the advancing city. The security there is heavily guarded, but it's not a place that Whitebeard wants to break through. That, you can rest assured." Sengoku is still very confident about the defensive capabilities of the advanced city. Chapter 340 that person exists. And LT, 49 and GT. Sengoku is still very confident about the defensive capabilities of the advanced city. It's just that he doesn't know why, whenever he talks about it, he can't help but think of Liang's figure. This monster, the monster that escaped from the advancing city intact, is still happily staying in Marin Fando. And he could only be powerless to deal with it. However, the pirates under the Whitebeard pirates have all been dispatched. They are returning from the New World with our Marin Fando as the target. The Ghost Spider's face also became serious and said. Don't worry about this, just keep an eye on the movements of the Whitebeard pirates. These guys are harmless. Without Whitebeard, they wouldn't be any threat at all. Warring States thought for a while, and said slowly. What he cares more about is his old rival, Whitebeard. If there is no Whitebeard to lead, those small-scale pirate groups under their command are nothing to be afraid of. It's just that he suddenly remembered the guy Blackbeard Titch. The other party, what are you doing? This war was obviously provoked by the guy Blackbeard, but now, he himself has disappeared without a trace, and he has not even arrived at the meeting of Chiwahai. Presumably, something is really planned. Thinking of this, Sengoku looked at the Ghost Spider and instructed, go and investigate Blackbeard and the movements of his pirate group. I always feel that he is plotting something wrong. Yes, Marshal. After the Ghost Spider nodded, he left the office. There was only one person left in the Warring States period, and his brows were furrowed, not knowing what he was thinking about. He still had an uneasy feeling in his heart, not about the battle with Whitebeard, but about Blackbeard, who was completely unsure. He already knew Whitebeard's character very well. As old rivals, he could speculate on the other's layout and so on. But Blackbeard's words are too mysterious, and he can't even know the other party's purpose. This made him feel a little irritable as a marshal who ruled the three armies. Holy Land Mary Joa. Here is the chassis of the Tianlong people. In the deepest part of Mary Joa, called Between the Flowers. This is the forbidden land of the Tianlong people. Even the Tianlong people dare not enter this area at will. It is also called the Holy Land in the Holy Land. At this time, the 4 members of the 5 old stars were kneeling on one knee, their heads lowered, their faces serious and solemn, and they were silent. In front of them is a towering staircase. At the top of the stairs, there is a throne, and a man is sitting, expressionless, looking down, looking at the 5 old stars in front of him. He opened his mouth slowly, his voice indifferent. Where's one more person? My lord, he is healing. The 4 people of the 5 old stars said in unison, with respectful expressions. This is what they say, the existence. The King of Dragons. The man of the Void Throne, Lord I am. Healing. It seems that the outsider's strength is not weak. I already felt it at the time, his strength is quite tyrannical. Man I am on the throne without any emotion. Yes, he is very strong. The 5 old stars nodded solemnly, recalling Li Ang's terrifying strength. They shuddered. However, what they couldn't believe was that Li Ang woke up this existence. This is something they never expected. This existence has awakened, and this sea area is really going to be thoroughly cleaned up.